Chapter 5:16. To this old man's son, Zhao Dingxiu, Su Su was his own son. The only difference was that they were not related by blood. If that young man's surname Su did not step into this alley, perhaps he would have died of old age in this town. The words, Zhao Dingxiu's tomb, were carved on the tombstone. Along with the tombstone would be scattered by the wind and rain. No one would remember the words of Zhao Dingxiu, the sage of calligraphy of Western Shu during the spring and autumn period. He would be worried that Su Su would not be able to marry a gentle wife. He would be worried that this child would be bullied by the ruffians in the marketplace. He would also be worried that without his scolding, Su Su would go astray, become useless, and live a miserable life. But now it was different. Li Shan had fulfilled his promise. He was going to take the incognito Su Su to the south. He was going to the 18 tribes of Nanzhao to strategize. Just as Li Shan had said on the cliff, Western Shu is not here, but there is still later Shu. Today, this old man's son personally came to apologize to the families whose children were teaching at the private school. He also gave away the pots of orchids. It was the butcher who had used a knife to cut his arm. When he heard that the teacher was leaving, he chopped off an entire fresh pig leg and stuffed it into his hands. Later, he was afraid that the small teacher would not be able to carry it, so he had the sturdy boy at home carry it to the door of the small courtyard. The boy, who was most likely going to inherit his father's business as a butcher, smiled and said a few words, "Teacher, remember to come back in the future." This old man's son smiled and reminded him, "Now that you know how to read, don't be sloppy when helping your father with the bookkeeping. You should be careful when doing things." The simple and honest boy scratched his head, not knowing how to answer. This old man's son waved his hand and struggled to carry the pig leg into the courtyard. Su Fengnian, who was thinking in the front yard, saw this and hurriedly carried it on his shoulder and helped to put it into the kitchen. It was close to dusk. Su Su had stewed a large pot. The aroma filled the entire courtyard. With him and Uncle Chi, 2 Taotais, there was no need to worry about not being able to finish it. Su Fengnian bought a few sets of fitting clothes in the city and a small bookcase that could fit the spring thunder. As for the spring and autumn sword, which was dormant with sword chi, he planned to carry it on his back instead of carrying a saber. It was better than nothing to conceal his identity. In this way, he really did look like a scholar carrying a book and a sword on his back. Su Fengnian didn't want to waste the 600 caddies of gold. He had the female devil Xue Songguan escort the 3 of them to Nanzhao. Although they had the swordsmith surnamed Shi as their escort and there wouldn't be any major problems, it was always better to have more retainers. Even the young death warrior was ordered to go to Beiliang on the way. At first, Wu didn't agree no matter what. He wanted to accompany His Royal Highness from Zhuzhizhou to Jinsizhou. Su Fengnian had no choice but to put on the airs of the Crown Prince of Beiliang. Only then did the young death warrior obey the order to go south. A large table of people ate the fragrant stewed meat together. Even the blind zither player was asked to stay. Su Fengnian also called for the death warrior Wu to come and freeload. It was a rare lively scene in the courtyard. After eating and drinking to their heart's content, Wu went back to pack up his belongings. Su Su took Xue Songguan to wander around the city. This old man took out half a string of money and secretly gave it to her. It was as if his disappointing son had finally swindled a girl. As an elder, he had to keep up appearances. Only this old man, the blacksmith Su Fengnian, and the other 2 were left in the courtyard. They didn't have any misgivings when talking. Su Fengnian gave Zhao Dingxiu the names of a few people from Nanzhao according to Li Shan's instructions. This old man was in a good mood. He silently memorized the names of these important people and their contact information. Finally, he asked directly, "Is the Su family rebelling?" Su Fengnian couldn't help but think of Mount Qingqing and Qingyang Palace. He wondered if they had already released 6,000 soldiers. He sighed and shook his head. It's just a means of self-protection. This old man said emotionally, there are as many strategists as there are carps in the spring and autumn period, but only a pair of hands can make a name for themselves. Your Su family's Xiao Chongling died early. It is a pity that he lost his talent as an advisor. Fortunately, Li Shan is still here. Otherwise, the hound will be cooked after the rabbit is killed. Your Su family may not have what it has today. Previously, I thought that while Li Shan was better than Zhao Chongling in strategy, he lost in vision and spirit. Compared to Zhao Chongling who died young, and Nayland Yusi who is still helping the king of Yen plan and manage the vassals, he is only strong in arithmetic but weak in Dao. But in the last 20 years, through the scattered news that came to Orange Province, I slowly see that Li Shan was hiding his abilities back then, or perhaps he was hidden by Zhao Chongling and could not show his abilities. When the Su family took over Beiliang, other than personally going to the battlefield, Li Shan was a first-rate scholar in geography, insight, diplomacy, and literary talent. Simply calling him a poisoned scholar is an injustice to Li Shan. Su Fengnian leaned lazily against the door and said with a smile, my master is an all-rounder. Su Xiao also said that Zhao Chongling always felt guilty back then. He said that as long as Zhao Chongling was alive, Li Shan would not be able to do his best. My master has really reached the realm of doing as he pleases. He can lead troops and govern with ease. Over the past 20 years, even I don't know how many moves master has made. I'm afraid that in master's eyes, only Zhang Julu is a match for him in the entire empire. This old man said with a regretful expression, it is a pity that I cannot meet Li Shan on this trip to the south. I have too many things I want to talk to him about. Right, His Royal Highness, how is your master's health? Su Fengnian said softly, not very good. The old master frowned. Su Fengnian squinted his eyes and looked at the sky. He smiled confidently and said, don't worry, he won't die. On the morning of the second day, they left the city, gathered near the dry moat outside the city, and then parted ways. Su originally wanted to shamelessly ask this old man to rent a carriage. Wouldn't it be good to show off? But when she woke up this morning and saw this old man's tense face, she did not have the courage. Fortunately, when she heard that Miss Xue was going with him to the unfamiliar south, she did not care if there was a carriage. Turning back to look at the handsome young master standing by the river and waving his hand, Su gently pulled on the woman's sleeve and asked in a small voice, you are not familiar with Su? The blind woman said softly, no. Su asked with a smile, then do you like him? The corner of her mouth curled up and she shook her head. Su was happy and relieved, but also a little sad. Even the old master found that brat pleasing to the eye. In the future, there was an 80 to 90% chance that he would have a bright future. As for herself, she was living a muddle-headed life as a scoundrel. Then she would not like her even more, right? The young man did not hurry to catch up with the group. His big bow and quiver were hidden and given to the burly blacksmith to carry. The young man just stood beside his master, wanting to say something but hesitating. Su Fengnian said with a smile, there is no use for you to follow me. You might even be a burden. If you die, you will die in vain. The young man of sacrifice looked melancholy. Who said the young man did not know the taste of worry? Su Fengnian patted him on the shoulder and comforted him, go. When you reach Beiliang Palace, tell Su Xiao and my master Li Shan that I am fine. This will count as you doing a good deed. The young man was worried quickly, but he was also not worried quickly. He smiled brightly and said, okay. Su Fengnian thought for a while, took out a bag of silver and threw it to the young man, don't let people think that we are stingy. The young man took the bag of silver and suddenly lowered his head and said in a low voice, His Royal Highness, why don't I go with you to Jinxi Province? I am actually not that afraid of death. Su Fengnian turned his body around and stepped on his butt. He laughed and scolded, "Get lost." The young man staggered and turned around to look at the back of this old man's son. He rubbed his eyes hard and then hurriedly ran to this old man's son's son. Su was surprised and asked, "Oh, you actually cried?" The young man who knew this person's nickname turned his head and said, "Damn you, it's none of your business." Su giggled and said, "Is that guy your brother?" The young man said angrily, "He is your uncle." Su was stunned for a moment and then laughed. The young man flew into a rage out of humiliation and imitated His Highness the Crown Prince's actions. He kicked Su's soft butt and said in an imposing manner, "Scram." Even this old man's son was happy to add insult to injury. He stroked his beard and smiled, "Little Wu, you taught him a good lesson." Su patted his sore butt and grimaced. He was not angry. He turned around and looked. Although Su did not think that he was smart, he was not stupid. He knew that the person surnamed Su was going north alone and did not let little Wu follow him. He was kind. If it was him, he probably would not have done it. Not to mention other things, it was pitiful to be alone without anyone to talk to. Su Fengnian, who did not know that he had become the scenery of others, went north. He patted the spring and autumn on his back and smiled, "I wanted to give it to Wenhua. It's not right to always use a wooden sword. But I have to wait until he is successful. Otherwise, it would be too embarrassing to carry it for a day or two and it would be snatched away. If he is stubborn and does not want it, then I will give it to Dong Tai as repayment for the gift of the sword. If I don't meet him, it's okay. I will return to Beiliang and give it to White Fox. If he doesn't want it, then this brother named Spring and Autumn, you can only follow me." Su Fengnian was silent and said to himself, "Actually, I want to give it to the old man with the sheepskin coat the most." In Honglu Cave in Jiangnan, there was a rice field between the green mountains. An old man with the sheepskin coat sat barefoot on the field after planting rice. There was a wooden water wheel beside him. Chapter 5:17. I originally wanted to be lazy and upload it tomorrow, but after thinking about it, I decided not to. I'll just take it as Li Chuangong's death and use the author's mouth to finish the story. P.S. If a new top scorer appears in the future, try your best to express your gratitude. Try your best. If Su Fengnian changed his face again, he would be in line with First Madame Xu Xiu's crafty taste. Indeed, he could not be more scholarly. The spring and autumn sword had already recognized him as its master. It withdrew its river-like sword intent and slung it on his back. He was already tall and slender, so he looked even more handsome. The only thing missing was an ancient temple sitting in the wilderness. Otherwise, when Su Fengnian entered the dormitory to read under the light, he might be seduced by the fox fairy. The geography of Orange Province was actually not much different from that of the Central Plains. There were also some towering mountains and steep ridges, but compared to the mountains and rivers of the south, it had a rougher feeling that it couldn't be carefully chewed. Along the way, Su Fengnian, other than nurturing his sword, spent most of his energy on deciphering the knot strands on the seventh blade. Stones from other mountains could be used to polish jade. In the battle in the small alley, the blind zither player had played like a child's 18 strokes of the hujia. Although he had dodged in a hurry, he had benefited greatly afterward. Since Su Fengnian had fulfilled his wish and successfully persuaded this old man to go to Nanzhao, he was in no hurry. Now that he had arrived at the fork in the mountain, he saw a simple wine shop with a flag that kept falling down no matter how strong the wind blew. A young woman with an enchanting figure was standing at the door and stretching. As she twisted her waist, the unique charm of a mature woman swayed out. When she saw Su Fengnian, the handsome scholar, her eyes lit up and she immediately trotted over. She took the young man's arm and dragged him to the wine shop. She squeezed and squeezed, not forgetting to raise her charming eyes, and stared straight at Su Fengnian. Seeing his face full of righteousness, she smiled tenderly and said, "Young master, don't pretend. I know you're this old Taoist's bird. Su Fengnian no longer purposely pulled a long face and looked like a lecher who hit it off with an adulterous couple. He laughed and said, Auntie has good eyes. Auntie. It was the young woman's turn to lose her composure. She said sweetly, You're so naughty. I'm only 18. Su Fengnian said honestly, Your daughter is 18, right? Little enemy, go to hell. The young woman had a charming smile on her face as she spoke flirtatious words. She took out a dagger from her sleeve and stabbed it towards Su Fengnian's waist. Su Fengnian's expression didn't change as he carried the book box on his back. He held the dagger between two fingers and said helplessly, Auntie, please don't be like this. I'm just here to quench my thirst. Since it's for money, it's not for free. The woman, who was quite charming, was still smiling. She squinted her eyes and said, How can silver be enough? Even the body and 100 caddies of meat should be enough to make meat buns for me. She pulled the dagger a few times, but it didn't move at all. Her eyes revealed some surprise. She shouted towards the tavern, Come out quickly. I've run into a tough nut to crack. Su Fengnian looked at the dozen or so strong men rushing out and didn't know whether to laugh or cry. That kid Wenhua would definitely like such a wonderful Jianghu. It was supposed to be the time when the tea before the Ming festival and the tea before the rain were in high demand, but the small tea house in Luqing still had little business. The owner of the tea house, who was not naturally suited for business, did not care, nor did the eccentric young lady, who had just arrived, care. However, Wenhua was anxious. It was not a good idea to eat scallion noodles with fried eggs every day. In any case, they should order some meat dishes every now and then, right? Wenhua was trying to attract customers on the street. His mouth was dry, but he did not invite a single customer into the tea house to sit down. He glanced at the old parrot hanging in the birdcage at the entrance, which was still calling out incessantly. He was so angry that he took down his wooden sword and fiercely knocked on the birdcage. However, this feathered beast imitated its words vaguely, but it had learned enough from its owner, Old Man Huang, to remain calm in the face of change. Wenhua shrunk his head back. When he saw Old Man Huang drinking tea with his back facing him, he stretched out 2 fingers to pluck the feathers. Just as he was about to succeed, a sunflower struck the back of his hand. Wenhua wanted to dodge, but it was simply too late. He glared at the little girl. This little girl was slender and elegant. Although her complexion was not too good, looking at her while eating could still increase one's appetite. Unfortunately, Wenhua boasted that he had turned over a new leaf. After falling in love at first sight for who knows how many times, he finally became enlightened. He made up his mind to uphold his chastity for that girl for the rest of his life. Wenhua angrily said, Jia family has married a beautiful cheek. If you hit me again, this young master will really make a move. When she first came to the tea house with a dispirited expression, Old Man Huang, who would not move an inch even if the sky fell and the earth cracked, felt heartache for her. Later, when he introduced her name, he was unwilling to put in any effort, only confirming that her surname was Jia, and the last 2 were homophones. Wenhua did not care about anything, as he was born to be at odds with her. Every time he called her name, he would deliberately shout a long string of words. Last month, a scene had happened that scared him so much that he almost peed his pants. A tea house customer deliberately made things difficult for her, disliking that her tea brewing skills were too shabby. She patiently changed 2 pots of tea, but the businessman, who had the demeanor of a scholar, was still finding fault with her despite the cold weather. Wenhua was originally watching the fun, and was happy to see this young lady make a fool of herself. Then, he saw the young lady standing next to the customer chuckling and chopping off his head with a karate chop. If it were not for Wenhua's quick-wittedness, throwing out a tea saucer to block the karate chop, and then risking his life to stand between the 2 of them, that head would have been chopped off like a watermelon. Since then, Wenhua had been on tenterhooks, wishing that he could even keep an eye on her when she went to the outhouse. These days, for the first time, Wenhua was willing to be an ox or a horse. He did not dare to trouble this young lady to receive the tea-house customers. He would rather she sit cross-legged on the bench by the window, and stare blankly with a sunflower that had been plucked from God knows where on her shoulder. The young woman chuckled with a stiff expression. Wenhua was helpless against her, and he walked into the tea-house embarrassedly before sitting down opposite old man Huang. When he saw the young woman didn't follow him, he said in a low voice, "Your granddaughter? Does she need to be spoiled like you? Just like last time, isn't it against the law to kill someone?" The old man with white hair took a sip of tea and said calmly, "My daughter killed a few people, yet it's against the law. Which clan's rules are these? Which country's laws are these? If it was 20 years ago, you could have asked those emperors and monarchs to answer and see who would nod." The corners of Wenhua's mouth twitched as he said, "Old man Huang, you don't even make a draft when you boast. If it's according to what you said, then wouldn't you be on equal footing with the Zhao clan son of heaven?" The old man glanced sideways at the wooden sword wanderer that personally taught him the sword technique, and he didn't say anything. Wenhua felt a chill run down his spine from being stared at, and he said, "All right, all right, all right. You're formidable, all right. Since you're so boastful, then I'll make 3 large bowls of onion noodles for you tonight. Otherwise, you'll surely be hungry to the point you won't be able to sleep." The old man that possessed an elegant aura waved his hand and said, "I'll go make a bowl right away." Wenhua said angrily, "If I don't go, then do you really think I'm a lackey?" Then he stretched out his hand and said with a mischievous smile, "My family's little Nian said that a man can't be subdued by force. Only riches and honor can allow me to be obscene. So, give me money first." The old man hovered over the teacup, so Wenhua immediately squeezed out a flattering smile and made an action of putting a towel on his shoulder. He ran away, but he muttered, "See if I'll add a fried egg for you. Ha, I didn't even put a few pieces of onion for you." The old man turned his head and raised his voice, and he shouted with a smile, "Little girl, come, come, come. Sit closer and drink tea with me." The little girl sat at the table next to him and sat cross-legged, and then she plucked the sunflowers one by one. The two of them still had their backs to each other. The old man didn't mind, and he drank the coarse tea mouthful by mouthful. Wenhua's legs were nimble, and the onion noodles weren't strenuous work. After eating that bowl of noodles with onion noodles that were so pitiful that they could be counted on one's fingers, he didn't fuss over every ounce with the kid in front of him. After he put down his chopsticks, he sighed with emotion, "Little one, among those people on the martial arts evaluation, who do you think is the real expert?" Chapter 5:18. When they talked about this, Wenhua was immediately in high spirits, and he laughed loudly. Is there even a need to say it? Of course, it's old Immortal Wang from the Martial Emperor City. Tuoba is a northern barbarian, so I don't care about him at all. In the end, it's still the peach blossom sword god, Dong Tai. He's the #1 swordsman. Of course, I admire him from the bottom of my heart. If I can exchange a sword move with sword god Deng in this lifetime, I will have no regrets even if I die. As for those Chao Guanzi, Demon Luo Yang, and the others, they are nothing. They are not my cup of tea. Old man Huang sneered, "With your knowledge, you want to achieve greater mastery in swordsmanship. Those who practice the sword only learn from that Dong Tai, but they don't know Li Chungang. In less than 100 years, the way of the sword will no longer occupy half of the glory of the martial way." Wenhua was stunned. Li Chungang. I only know that our dynasty has an extremely exaggerated martial ranking, and this old geezer is only ranked 8th. Later on, Bimang's martial ranking was nowhere to be seen. Wasn't he pushed down by someone? The old man picked up the teacup and was about to splash it on Wenhua's face. Wenhua hastily used his sleeve to protect his face, which he believed to be incomparably handsome. However, the old man stopped and drank a mouthful of tea. He said slowly, in the past 500 years of Jianghu, Li Chungang is the only great talent whose attainments in the way of the sword can catch up to the immortal Lu Dongxian. It's been 500 years, not just 100 years. At that time, Li Chungang was ranked among the spring and autumn 13 armors. Among them, Li Chungang's sword and armor champion was the most unquestionable. "Oh," said Wen Hua, and then he humbly asked for guidance. "Old man Huang, don't talk about unrealistic things. Tell me the truth, otherwise, I won't be able to understand it as well." The old man laughed and said, "Do you know how many armors Li Chungang had cut with one sword at the Guangling River?" Wen Hua thought for a moment and asked probingly. 800. When he saw old man Huang smiling without speaking, Wen Hua gritted his teeth and made an exorbitant demand just like this old fellow. 1,600. The old man sneered, "Add another 1,000. Wen Hua slapped his thigh and roared, "Fucking ferocious. In the future, I will no longer worship Dong Tai, who is rumored to have provoked Tuoba. I will change it to Li Chungang." The old man sighed. "If I'm not mistaken, he's already dead." Wen Hua was stunned. Old man Huang spun the white porcelain teacup with 2 fingers. He looked at the ripples on the surface of the tea and said softly, "There is a limit to a person's strength." He broke through 2,600 armor with a single sword and suffered irreparable injuries. Such a fascinating feat is even better than the Wu family's 9 swords that broke through 10,000 cavalry 200 years ago. It's a pity that I didn't see it with my own eyes. It's all your fault. However, although Li Chungang was heavily injured, logically speaking, it shouldn't be difficult for him to live for another 3 or 4 years. However, with Li Chungang's temperament, how could he bear to slowly grow old to the point where he couldn't even lift a sword? Back then, since he was willing to fall into the finger-profound realm for the sake of Fingdu's green-robed man, he wasn't willing to ascend or reincarnate after returning to being a sword immortal. Death is death. Only then would it be in line with Li Chungang's indomitable sword intent. This is why he recently lent Dong Tai a helping hand from 10,000 miles away. Gifting the sword is secondary. With a single sword, he split open the heavens and traveled 10,000 miles to the west. Gifting the sword Dao comprehension is the key. Finally, he helped Dong Tai, this sword Dao Jr., to fight to a draw with Tuoba. The old man seemed to have forgotten to drink tea as he sighed. Green clothes fluttering in the wind, wielding a sword in the Jianghu, causing the entire Jianghu to look up to him. His life has come to an end. With his final sword, he still created a new sword immortal. Only Li Chungang can do such a thing. He died a worthy death. I just don't know if Li Chungang can truly die without regrets. The old man laughed self-deprecatingly and pointed at the tea. The tea cools after the person dies. Not long after, the Jianghu will only see Dong Tai's unparalleled glory and forget that Li Chungang once brought the sword Dao to an unparalleled height time and time again. In my opinion, the world can do without an old man like Wang Xianji, but it can't do without a true playboy like Li Chungang. King of Jing'an, Zhao Heng, is dead. This man from the Zhao family, who was worse than a woman his entire life, finally did something that a man should do. Li Shan worked hard and finally died of illness. There are countless strategists in the world, but only 9 people were evaluated by me. Poison warrior Li Shan was ranked 3rd. With his death, there are only 4 people left. It's hard to say whether the other young people can replace them. Seeing the scattered but not falling pillar of luck of West Chu reconnect with the heavens, that old guy from the Imperial Astronomer, who was often tricked by me, is probably furious. I don't know if that old pedant has finished compiling the almanac. If he hasn't, that bastardly Xiaoxin will beat him to it and the Confucian school will be in danger. West Chu's Grand Preceptor, Sun Shiji, doesn't have many years left to live. Of the remaining 4 top strategists of the Liang dynasty, Nalan Yisi, who works as a helper for the king of Yen outside the capital, has at most 4 years left to live. As for the other two, who are cowards in the capital, Yang Taisui, the sickly tiger, has destroyed most of his martial arts. The remaining one is the least famous, but the most promising. Most of the court's movements in the next 30 years are in his hands. He was the mastermind of the white-robed case. Half of the 12 men of sacrifice by Su Zhao's side died on the way to assassinate this person. One of them was this person's favorite concubine. The cycle of karma is not good. Isn't it funny? They're all dead. They're all going to die. Counting back and forth, there's one less person. Whether it's Jianghu or the country, it's still for the young. I like this kind of world. It's not dead. The Liang dynasty has Zhang Julu and Gu Jiantang. Beimang has the middle-aged Tuoba and the younger Dongjua. In the future, there will be an endless stream of newcomers who will rise to the top like bamboo shoots after the rain. This is interesting. However, the Taiping Order of the Chess and Sword Music School doesn't seem to have given up. He wants to help the Empress of Beimang play a big game of chess. I'm looking forward to it. Wen Hua was dizzy from hearing this. He asked in surprise, "Old man Huang, are you possessed? What nonsense are you talking about?" The old man picked up the teacup and drank it all in one gulp. You don't have to pay attention to this chessboard. Just practice the sword at ease. You can only practice the sword for the rest of your life. Scholars have scholars' matters, boorish men have boorish work, and merchants have merchants' business. Everyone lives and works within the rules. This is the world's peace. Wen Hua patted the wooden sword at his waist and snorted coldly. Just you wait. The old man mocked, "Don't make me wait for a few decades. I can't afford to wait." Wen Hua slammed the table. You've just eaten my onion noodles and you're already burning the bridge after crossing the river. The old man was about to speak when his head was hit by something. He turned around and saw that his daughter had hit him with a sunflower. With his scheming mind, he immediately understood and laughed. I know. Don't worry. I can live as long as I don't want to. No matter what, I'll live until the day you get married. Then, the old man was sent flying by a sunflower. Wen Hua, who felt that his anger had been vented, couldn't help but give a thumbs up and exclaim in admiration. You're even more chivalrous than a heroine. Apart from Li Chungang and Dong Tai, I admire you for daring to hit old man Huang. Wen Hua suddenly had a thought and suddenly started talking to himself. I'm thinking that Su Fengnian, that pervert, will definitely take a liking to a girl with such character like you. Won't you become my sister-in-law in the future? Then what do I have to call old man Huang? Then, he was also sent flying. Old man Huang sat on the ground and asked himself, since Li Yishan drew a line before dying, why don't I go to Xiangfan to take a look? He heard a cold snort above his head. The old man sighed and said, a grown girl can't be kept at home. Forget it. Beiliang's own courtyard is chaotic enough. It's hard to say whether or not that brat can survive. Why should I bother to be this evil person? It's more practical to compete with that Taiping Ling who doesn't want the world to be at peace. Do you want to buy Taiyan? That depends on whether or not I agree. He stood up and patted the dust off. He said with a smile, daughter, wait here. I'll make you some onion noodles. Wen Hua, who had been hit for no reason, hurriedly shouted, give me a bowl too. Old man Huang didn't pay attention to him at all. This made Wen Hua depressed again and missed the little new year. Chapter 5:19. Su Fengnian let go of the dagger as he was surrounded by more than 10 ferocious bandits. The woman, who had a graceful figure but a vicious heart, took the dagger away from him. She was also tactful and no longer stuck to the handsome scholar. She took a few steps back and imitated the naive look of a 16-year-old girl. She smiled and asked, young master, are you afraid? Su Fingyan smiled bitterly and said, "How can I not be afraid?" She held her chest and smiled sweetly. "It's good that you're afraid. I see that you have some skills, so I'll give you two options. One is to fight to the death and challenge all of us. After you die, we'll chop your meat and make steamed buns. The other is to join our stronghold and become brothers. We'll drink meat and drink wine together." A man who was as thin as a bamboo pole but had a full chest of hair whispered, "Qing Zhu Nyang, shouldn't it be eating meat and drinking wine?" The woman who was exposed raised her eyebrows. She twisted her waist and walked like a bamboo leaf. She stepped on the man's foot and said, "I'll let you eat meat and drink wine. Without me, you can take off your pants and cut off your balls to cook and eat." Su Fingyan said without hesitation, "Let's be brothers." The woman's eyes flashed with contempt. The skinny monkey spat and scolded, "With this kind of virtue, it's a waste of food for our stronghold to accept." The sound of horse hooves came closer and closer. The woman frowned and raised her arm to cover half of her face. She squinted her eyes and looked over. More than 10 men were happy. Su Fingyan turned around and saw 6 valiant riders galloping over. The rider in the lead had a natural and upright appearance. He carried an iron rod wrapped in gold and silver thread. In a second-rate righteous sect, this person would not be careless at all if he were to be placed in the position of the head. One of the 2 riders beside him had a black body and carried a pair of broad axes. He had yellow eyebrows and unkempt hair. He was born with a ferocious face. The other rider was dressed as a Taoist priest. He wore a large linen robe with a pattern of yin and yang fish on it. There was a brown belt inlaid with jade around his waist. He wore a pair of silk shoes and clean socks. His face was white and his beard long. The remaining 3 riders were all strong men with weapons in their hands. Except for the leader of the stick dance and the middle-aged Taoist, the other 4 were all stained with blood. Especially the man with yellow eyebrows, it was as if he had been soaked in a blood vat. The 6 riders dismounted at the same time. The valiant leader said sadly, "We were not able to save Brother Song. We are sorry." The skinny monkey wailed and fell to the ground, wailing incessantly. A dark-skinned man who was 3 times the weight of a skinny monkey threw his 2 broad axes together and said in a muffled voice, "Damn bastard, I've been killing from the east side of the execution field to the west side. I've been killing until my hands have gone limp." The Taoist priest looked at Su Fingyan, the uninvited guest, and then glanced at the woman. The latter explained in a bad mood, "The fish and prawns have just been caught in the net. They haven't had time to cook them yet." She looked at the unlucky handsome young man and smiled charmingly, "This young man has some skills. Since my brothers have arrived, I'll capture him and send him to the kitchen. I'll make a few big trays of meat buns and send them up the mountain to reward everyone." The handsome leader frowned and said, "Lady Qing Zhu, why are you doing this kind of business again?" She said righteously, "If I don't do this again, I won't have anything to eat. A hero will starve to death for a penny. I don't care how chivalrous you are, but I can't treat myself unfairly." The man took out a gold ingot from his pocket and smiled gently, "Take it as this month's food money." He turned to Su Fingyan and smiled, "I'm sorry to disturb you, young master. I'm Han Fong from Mount Liui. If you trust me, let's drink a bowl of inferior wine together. Just take it as me helping you get over your shock." The man who sat on the ground and gasped for breath said with a rough voice, "Brother Han, why are you talking nonsense with this pretty boy? Drinking is giving him a lot of face. If he doesn't drink, let me, Lu Dei, chop off his head with an axe and use it as a urinal." Su Fingyan smiled and nodded, "Drink." The elegant man who became a bandit shouted, "Don't be rude." He took the lead and sat down at the table outside the wine shop. He put aside the iron staff that was passed down from his ancestors that was worth a lot of silver and stretched out his hand to Su Fingyan. Su Fingyan did not stand on ceremony. He took down his bookcase and sat down face to face with this man who called himself Han Fong from Mount Liui. They clinked bowls and drank the wine in one gulp. His straightforward action won the favor of many men who were watching. The Taoist who carried an ancient sword with pine patterns on his back sat down gently. Han Fong introduced, "This is Zhang Shoucheng, born in a noble family. He is good at everything, including the classics, astronomy, geography, and everything. He is good at writing. He was once a trusted aide of a provincial governor in Orange Province, but he became a Taoist because he was framed by someone. He is different from us rough people." The man with yellow eyebrows who sat down casually said, "Brother Han, you're still the descendant of 3 generations of generals. If it weren't for your Han family, Ji Province would have been stabbed into a sieve by the northern barbarians. If it weren't for that fatuous ruler of Liang dynasty, Zhao, who didn't know what was good for him, you would have been a 4th-grade border official by now." Han Fong's eyes were clouded, but he hid his emotions well. He laughed at himself and said, "Young master, you must be joking. Let's not talk about this. Let's drink." The curvaceous woman who was nicknamed Lady Qin Zhu picked up another jar of wine and smashed it on the table. "You've drugged it. You're all fish on my chopping board." Han Fong quickly smiled and said, "And this one, I have to remind you. Lu Qingzhu, just call her Lady Qingzhu. She has a sharp tongue but a soft heart." Su Fingnian did not know what was good for him and said, "I've just seen Lady Qingzhu's dagger. She has a sharp tongue but a sharp heart." Han Fong was stunned and felt a little embarrassed. Chapter 520. The woman smiled sweetly and leaned towards Su Fingnian. "This little scholar, I like you more and more." Slap. Without some elasticity, there would not be such a crisp sound. The woman widened her eyes and looked at the handsome scholar who she thought was not very strong. Was she being taken advantage of in public? Was she being pecked by a baby goose all year round? Su Fingnian retracted his hand and smiled. "Qin Zhunyang, if you are really willing, let's go to the bridal chamber." The woman laughed and wiped the tears from the corner of her eyes. She threw a coquettish glance and walked into the house. The middle-aged Taoist unsheathed his ancient sword and slashed it. It stopped at Su Fingnian's neck and quickly returned to the sheath. Everything happened in the blink of an eye. The men who were not qualified to sit down and drink saw this scene and did not even dare to breathe. Su Fingnian, who seemed to be in the dark, looked at Han Fong and asked, "Qin Zhunyang, are you sharpening your knife?" Han Fong laughed. "You have a good temperament. I will go to the mountain village with my brothers first. If you don't mind, you can come with us. If you want to drink more, you can ask Qin Zhunyang to lead the way." Su Fingnian smiled. "Let's drink a few more bowls. Master Han will go first." They stood up and cupped their fists. Han Fong led the 20 men up the mountain. Su Fingnian sat alone at the table and drank a mouthful of wine. Qin Zhunyang stood nearby and said coldly, "They are not good people." Su Fingnian was puzzled and asked, "Why do you say that?" Qin Zhunyang sat down and poured a bowl of tasteless wine. That Han Fong used to be the leader of several mountain villages in Mount Liui. He looked down on everyone. In the end, those mountain villages worked together to deal with him. Now he is in a miserable state. Even Song's sworn brother went to visit the brothel in the city and leaked the news. He was stopped by a large group of soldiers and tied up and sent to the execution ground. Han Fong brought people to save him, but there were only 6 of them. Doesn't that mean they can't save anyone and can only kill unarmed and innocent people? As for that man with the double axes, although he looks like an ox, just listen to him speak in a genteel manner, you will know that he is not a good person. He has a belly full of evil tricks. In the past, the mountain village was prosperous, there were many people. He went to the small city to drink wine with prostitutes. These past few years, I don't know if he got drunk or went crazy, but he killed dozens or even hundreds of people in a row. How many young girls have been defiled by him? That Taoist man surnamed Zhang has a lot of crooked ideas. He is the mountain village's military counselor. Naturally, his swordsmanship can be considered brilliant. It is said that when he was young, he studied under a great Taoist master of Dao De Zong and learned a celestial technique that can summon the wind and summon the rain. I think it is called a five-thunder heavenly spirit or something like that. But Laonyang has never seen him ride the cloud or ride the mist. As for the rest of them, which one of them has not killed more than a few people? The mountain village raised an apricot yellow banner, saying that they want to enforce justice on behalf of heaven. But the rule in the mountain village is that whoever goes up the mountain must kill people at the foot of the mountain as proof of allegiance. How can this be considered enforcing justice on behalf of heaven? Su Fingnian laughed and said, "Then what about you?" The woman's expression was calm. Laonyang is the same kind of trash as them. How can I be a good person? It's just that I don't have the ability to kill you, otherwise how can you sit here and drink wine so comfortably? That's right, what is your surname and name? Su Fingnian replied, Su Lang, I came to Mount Liui on a tour. I didn't know that this place is even more chaotic than the turmoil and chaos of war. If I had known earlier, I would have taken a detour. She laughed and said, You should have taken a detour. This mountain is a den of thieves. However, I don't mind telling you the truth. No matter how ruthless Han Fang's bandit mountain village is, compared to the number 1 or 2 devil cult sect in the Orange province, they are just children playing house. Even if they only release a fart, these several hundred so-called Jianghu heroes of this mountain village will be suffocated to death. Fortunately, these devil rabbits don't eat the grass near their nest, they don't care about Han Fang and these small bandits. Su Fingnian was puzzled. Why are you telling me this? He asked. She propped up her cheeks, imperceptibly placing her chest on the table, revealing 2 lumps of dazzling fullness. She smiled coquettishly and said, You are just a fledgling entering the Jianghu. There is no knockout drug in the wine, can't Laonyang rub some on the bottom of the bowl? Su Fingnian stared at her. You. She laughed and said, You dare to take advantage of Laonyang, how many lives do you have? Later on, I'll strip you naked and throw you on the chopping board. I'll chop off that little earthworm of yours first and make it into a side dish with wine. How do you think it will taste? Su Fingnian swayed and fell. She was getting happier and happier. In the end, after swaying for a long time, she still did not see this handsome scholar fall down. It was only until she noticed the young master's pair of captivating red phoenix eyes squinting that she bit her lip and said resentfully, Is it fun to tease me? After Su Fingnian sat up straight, he laughed and said, It's fun. In the end, the woman snorted and laughed. Silly handsome boy, Laonyang actually didn't rub any drug on the bottom of your bowl. Who is teasing who? Su Fingnian was stunned. She said softly, You should go. Don't let your emotions affect your decisions. When you go up the mountain to that stronghold, even if you fall into a big fire pit, even if you are lucky and have excellent skills, you will still lose a layer of skin if you climb out. Su Fingnian said softly, Thank you. I know that you pretended to be a bad person just now to help me escape. Being stabbed in exchange for my life is just losing all my belongings. No matter how you look at it, it is a profit. She smiled and did not say anything. Su Fingnian lowered his head and drank a mouthful of wine. The two of them were speechless. She suddenly said, In the past, I wasn't this kind of bodhisattva. It's just that you look a bit like my man. Su Fingnian nodded seriously and said, From this, it can be seen how romantic and elegant your man is. The woman smiled sweetly and poured a bowl of wine over. Su Fingnian gently reached out his hand and used the embracing sparrow style. It was incomparably mysterious as he condensed the wine into a piece and then put it back into the bowl in front of her. Who said that spilled water can't be taken back? Chapter 521. Su Fengnian, who had played the game of seizing the sparrow and collecting the water, laughed and said, "It's just acrobatics." Lu Qingju's slender finger touched the porcelain bowl, then she rubbed her willowy eyebrows and said in surprise, "It's just acrobatics." Su Fengnian did not answer and asked, "How did you enter the stronghold?" She did not dare to drink the bowl of wine. After thinking for a while, she said with a smile, "My complaints are too much and it hurts my liver and intestines. Let's not talk about it." Su Fengnian was not tactful enough to get to the bottom of it. "Your man." She rolled her eyes. "You really want to know?" Su Fengnian shook his head and said, "Forget it." Su Fengnian did not want to hear about it. Instead, she spilled the beans from a bamboo tube, but her tone was indifferent. He was dead, a useless scholar. When his family was destroyed, a man in the stronghold found him an eyesore and used an iron spear to crush his stomach. Afterwards, I was betrothed to a third party by Han Fang. Before we even consummated our marriage, that hero could not control the thing in his crotch and hurriedly wanted to have sex in the wild. My dress had already fallen to my calves and I waited for half a day naked. Only then did I know that a big shot from the devil cult was passing by and bumped into him and smashed his head. The devil lord saw that I was somewhat beautiful, so he showed great mercy and took me as his exclusive property. I followed him to that majestic sect. I was probably considered a concubine maid. I served him with a few foxes for half a year. When he got tired of playing with me, he sent me back. Feng Dai and the others only had evil intentions, but they did not have the guts. If they wanted to be the concubine of that great devil lord, they had to be alive, right? Otherwise, do you think a pretty widow like me could have lived until today? Even if I could have lived, I probably would not have had the strength to stand up straight in broad daylight. Serving men, especially those who were full of brute force, was very physical work. Now that he thought about it, back when he was in a place like the Imperial Palace, it could be said that he had seen a paradise on earth. He had not suffered for nothing. You see, you've brought up the topic. This old lady is really heartbroken. Let's change to another bowl of wine. This bowl is filled with evil energy. I'm afraid that I'll fall into your trap and really enter the bridal chamber with you. At that time, this old lady won't suffer any losses. You're just a newborn calf, and your head will be smashed by that devil's palm. You'll be a white puddle like soy milk. Su Fengnian pushed the wine bowl over and asked calmly, "What sect is this? Why is it so influential?" She said sarcastically, "Young Master Su, you haven't even heard of Shenmen's thatched hut. How dare you travel to Mount Liui to study?" Su Fengnian laughed, "Shenmen's thatched hut. It sounds like a righteous sect that leans towards Confucianism." Qing Zhu and Yang took a sip of wine. Seeing that there was no one around, she said, "Han Fang's nickname is the Qilin General. Which eye of yours saw that he looked like a Qilin? Do you really think he's the state preceptor of Beimang? Zhang Xiuqing is known as the Thunder Lord, but I've never seen him summon thunder." Song Kuei, who was beheaded on the execution field this time, was also called the Cauldron-Carrying Heavenly King. Isn't that a self-proclaimed title? With his small body that swayed in the wind, it's hard to say if he could carry this old lady who's over 90 kilograms. He only knows how to use some lowly poisoned hidden weapons. Therefore, Shenmen's thatched hut, although it's called a thatched hut, is actually similar to the emperor's residence. There's gold and jade everywhere. I don't know how they earned the money. Even the latrines are more imposing than the residences of the leaders of the strongholds on the mountain. I've never really been to the Imperial Palace, but I think it's not far off. Su Fengnian nodded and then asked, "Qing Zhu and Yang, you're more than 90 kilograms, right? You should be around 50 kilograms. The woman was embarrassed and angry. "Can't I eat 7 to 8 kilograms of beef today?" Su Fengnian dismissed it with a laugh. The woman looked at the sky and said, "Oh, you don't treat Mount Liui as a child's game. It's not a place where you can come and go as you please. We're all elites. If we don't have some skills, we won't be able to stand firm. Go, leave behind something for me so that I can give an explanation to Han Fang and the others. I'm no longer the Guanyin goddess who saves people in distress, nor am I a woman who's at the age of her first awakening of love. You can't be confused just because you have a good appearance. If you don't want to part with the sword you're carrying, take out some silver and treat it as a loss to ward off disaster. Han Fang gave me an ingot of gold to reassure those poor brothers of his who can't take the next meal. I'm just trying to pretend to be a rich man in front of you. This stronghold has long been ruined. Su Fengnian really did take out a stack of banknotes from his bookcase and put it on the table. He smiled and said, "More than 100 taels. Is this enough?" She raised her eyebrows and tapped the banknotes with her fingers. She laughed and said, "You're really a rich man. With your wealth, as long as your family's wealth isn't thin, you'll be worshipped as a spendthrift and a god of wealth in the stronghold. As long as they don't suck your blood dry, your life will be guaranteed. Just now I worked so hard to put on a show, but it turns out that I've been thinking too much. Su Lang, where are you from? Are you really a scholar who traveled to study?" Su Fengnian teased, "I'm from a small family in Gusai Prefecture. There are so many aristocratic families there that they're as numerous as the hairs on an ox. If you don't have the surname of Ding, you'd be too embarrassed to go out and greet people. You can't even lift your head. I didn't expect you to have 100 or 200 taels of silver here and become a rich man. If I'd known earlier, I'd have come here earlier to show off." She glanced at the glib-tongued scholar and said sarcastically, "You've been peeking at me for a long time and you don't dare to touch me?" Su Fengnian, who was caught red-handed, shook his head and said, "I'm not that kind of person." After she got up, she patted her chest, either intentionally or unintentionally. The charming scene of her trembling made the man want to run over and hold her in his pocket, afraid that she would drop it because it was too heavy. Su Fengnian still kept his head down. Qin Junyang didn't know whether to roll her eyes or give him a coquettish look. She left with a smile. There were no waiters to help her in the wine shop, so she had to work alone. There were always trivial matters that she couldn't finish. Afterwards, the scholar with the sword and the book on his back didn't plan to go up the mountain. After paying more than 100 taels of silver, he sat down at the fork at the foot of the mountain. He moved the table to a shady place under the eaves and took out a geography book from his book chest. He asked Qin Junyang for a plate of salted peanuts, a bowl of cooked beef, and a jar of wine. He sat there from noon until dusk. Qin Junyang didn't treat him as a guest of honor. She made a careless meal and ate it, then asked him what his plan was. Su Lang said that he wanted to stay here for a few days and pondered over how to maintain a mountain stronghold. He also asked her about a lot of trivial matters, such as how to make money, how to recruit people, and how to win people's hearts. She even asked him if he wanted to cultivate a vegetable garden on the mountain when there were no killings or robberies. She didn't hide anything from him. After all, it wasn't a big secret. If this young scholar was a secret agent from the government and came here to scout for information and pave the way for the armored soldiers to enter the mountain to suppress the bandits, she wouldn't be afraid. If the mountain stronghold was razed, she could just go back to the thatched hut of Shenmen and work like a cow or a horse. To her, who didn't care who died, there was no one in the world that she was willing to collect. He could also pass the time at night, so he took 2 benches and slept through the night. In the house, Qin Junyang tossed and turned for half the night before she fell asleep. When she got up in the morning, she looked at herself in the bronze mirror. No matter how she tried, she couldn't get rid of the dark circles under her eyes. When she saw the energetic guy sitting there holding a book, her eyes were full of resentment. She didn't know whether she was angry at his shamelessness or angry that he was worse than a beast last night. He didn't even knock on the widow's door. Although she didn't know how to open the door, at least it proved that she still had some beauty. She snorted coldly and walked to the village with the banknotes that he gave to the village. After hesitating for a moment, she still didn't take 1 or 2 banknotes. However, she didn't spit out the ingot of gold that was in her mouth. This group of men were freeloading on food and drink, so this money should be hers. The village where Han Fong lived was not far from the mountain, more than 10 li away. However, the mountain road was not as flat as the official road. Fortunately, she was used to it and didn't find it too strenuous. After all, she was no longer the delicate girl who lived like a princess and didn't touch anything. Han Fong politely accepted the banknotes and was very polite. She even personally served him a pot of tea. Liu Dai, who was practicing in the mud martial arts field, stared at the young widow's buttocks and then looked at her tired expression. The man, who looked uncouth but was actually very thoughtful, had a strange look in his eyes. He was jealous and sneered in his heart. "Reckless young man, you even dared to eat this thorny woman. Do you think you can just leave after eating her?" Yesterday, when they went up the mountain, military counselor Zhang said that this kid might have some martial arts skills, but it was only Shira's kung fu. Could he withstand the pressure of the big devil in the thatched hut with one finger? This bodhisattva could single-handedly trample over a few stockades without taking a break. Chapter 522. Qing Zhu and Yang left the stronghold and returned to the wine shop. She saw that Su Lang was still there, reading. Until today, the skinny monkey, whose name she still did not know, was squatting by the side in a daze. This scoundrel was gluttonous and lazy, bullied the weak and feared the strong. He had all the faults he should have. However, compared to the bandits on the mountain who would easily chop melons and cut vegetables, he was indeed less capable and more cowardly, so he did not appear as abominable. These past few years, he often came here to help with some trivial matters, so it was certain that he could not control his eyes. However, unexpectedly, he had never done something as perverted as pricking the window paper to peep at her bathing and coming out of the bath. This made her somewhat have a whole new level of respect for him. In this mountain, who did not believe in the principle of seeking riches and honor in the midst of danger? The skinny monkey became a distinct anomaly, and also a good-for-nothing example. She heard that the first time he killed someone under the guise of allegiance, he did not completely chop a woodcutter to death with a single chop. His tears and snot flowed profusely, and he even had to carry the woodcutter to see a doctor. Fortunately, there was a brother watching from the side, who helped him stab the woodcutter to end his life, and only then was he allowed to enter the stronghold. However, if one were to say that because of this, she was willing to spend a few nights with this skinny monkey, that would be too preposterous. She still preferred a more scholarly man. Seeing the shrewish Qing Zhu and Yang, the skinny monkey could only rely on his large chest hair to pretend to be a man to squeeze out a smile. He did not dare to talk to her, and only pretended to worm his way into being friends with the young man. He asked, "Hey, surnamed Su, do you know that a major event has happened in Jianghu?" Su Fingnian put down the orange prefecture geography book that he had stolen from this old man's son. He laughed and asked, "What's the matter? Tell me." The skinny monkey stood up and swaggered over to sit across from him. Seeing him take the initiative to push a plate of peanuts over, his originally somewhat nervous mood calmed down a lot, and he quietly became a bit more carefree. He threw a peanut into his mouth, and with one foot on the bench, he clicked his tongue and said, "A few days ago I went to the city and went to a restaurant with a brother who works as a servant. Do you know which restaurant it is? A meal at Fengxian restaurant costs a few taels of silver." The woman who could not stand this skinny monkey's blind bragging smacked him on the back with a broom and laughed, "If you have something to fart to say it quickly. With your poor life, how could you know any brother who works as a servant? Going to Fengxian Tavern to drink. Why didn't you just say that you were going to Jianghu to visit a courtesan? Isn't that more impressive?" The skinny monkey, whose face was flushed red, swallowed his anger back into his stomach. His imposing manner was weakened by 70 to 80%. He said embarrassedly, "Woman, you have long hair and short knowledge. You are looking down on me." Seeing that Qing Zhu and Yang was about to raise the broom and smash it down, the skinny monkey-like man hurriedly said, "Do you know that the peach blossom sword god, Dong Tai, has come from Liang?" Su Fengnian nodded. "Let's talk later." Qing Zhunyang went into the house and took out some meat and wine before sitting down. The skinny monkey-like man smelled the fragrance on her body and swallowed his saliva. He said in high spirits, "Didn't the third most powerful sword god in the world go to compete with our military god? Guess what happened?" Qing Zhunyang was not in the mood to guess riddles, but Su Fengnian smiled and said, "He should have lost." The skinny monkey slapped his thigh. "Wrong. What are you yelling for?" Qing Zhunyang, who was startled, picked up the broom under her feet and rushed over. The skinny monkey, who was slapped to the ground, did not dare to be angry with her. After sitting up straight, he lowered his voice and said mysteriously, he was going to lose. That sword god even broke the peach blossom branch. He fought with the military god of Tuoba from morning to night, and then from night to morning. I don't know how many days and nights they fought. "Oh, Qing Zhunyang, don't hit me, don't hit me. I'll get to the point." At the critical moment when victory was decided, oh, no, when Dong Tai was about to lose, all the hundreds and thousands of masters watching heard a sentence. It came from thousands of miles away, from the sky. Qing Zhunyang's face was full of sarcasm. She sneered and said, "You are talking nonsense again, aren't you? Do you think you are a storyteller telling a fairy tale?" The skinny monkey said with a thick neck, "It is absolutely true." Su Fengnian poured a bowl of wine and did not forget to pour a bowl for Qing Zhunyang and the skinny monkey as well. He said softly with a smile, "Continue." The skinny monkey glanced at Qing Zhunyang. As for whether he wanted to cut her face or her chest, it was unknown. Then he said, "I heard a sentence, Dong Tai, I want to borrow a sword from you. Do you dare to take it?" Su Fengnian raised his wrist to take the wine. He stopped there and did not drink. The skinny monkey was about to slap his thigh, but when he thought of what had just happened, he retracted his hand and said with a fascinated expression, "Then the sword god Deng replied, Dong Tai, why wouldn't I dare? Thank you, Li Chungang, for opening the mountain for our swordsmanship." What happened next was even more frightening. A sword fell from the sky and into the hands of the peach blossom sword god. Then he fought the military god of Tuoba to a draw. No matter how soul-stirring the battle was, when it fell into the mouth of someone like the skinny monkey, there was always a lack of chewiness. Qing Zhunyang was skeptical. She had more doubts than she believed. She looked sideways and saw the young scholar drinking with his head lowered. The skinny monkey sighed and said in a muffled voice, "They are all celestial beings flying around. I don't know if I will be able to catch a glimpse of them from afar in this lifetime." Qing Zhunyang did not think too deeply and asked casually, "Who is this Li Chungang? Who can lend a sword to the third most powerful person in the world, the peach blossom sword god?" The skinny monkey, who had emptied his stomach, said weakly, "He is probably a great swordsman from Liang." Qing Zhunyang saw the young scholar raise his head. It was a stiff face with no expression. He put down the bowl and said, "He is a one-armed old man with a sheepskin coat." The skinny monkey curled his lips and said, "Who are you trying to fool? A one-armed old man can ride a sword for thousands of miles. You speak as if you have seen him before." The young scholar smiled sadly and said, "I will never see him again." The skinny monkey did not know what to say to warm up the atmosphere. He saw Qing Zhunyang go into the house to work. After eating more than half of the wine, meat and peanuts, he felt bored and went back to the mountain. Qing Zhunyang stood at the door from time to time and glanced at Su Lang. There was a long sword with a green scabbard on the table. She squinted her red phoenix eyes that even she would be jealous of. She just pursed her lips and stared blankly. Other than 2 meals, he just sat there. Qing Junyang still couldn't sleep even after the sky darkened. Through the window, she saw the flickering oil lamp outside. She put on her clothes and walked out, asking softly, "Do you want some wine?" He turned his head and smiled. He said softly, "No need." She still went to get a jar of wine. It was one of the few remaining good wine. After opening the seal, the aroma filled the air. She said, "I will drink by myself." After drinking a few bowls, she asked, "You really don't want to drink?" He shook his head and said, "Just drink. I will wait for you to get drunk and have sex." The woman, who was amused, really started drinking alone. She drank heartily and did not lose to those men who boasted that they could only nod their heads if they were killed. As she drank, she began to speak in detail, just like the saying in my hometown, "A hairless bird is taken care of by the heavens." In any case, I somehow managed to survive. I was afraid of death and felt that it was too ugly to hang myself. How painful would it be to slit your throat and stab your stomach with a kitchen knife? A chaste and pure woman, I really can't do it. This woman, who used to rub ink with her bare hands and add incense with her red sleeves, was also Qing Junyang, who used to make human meat buns. She was drunk and her eyes were hazy with tears. That husband of mine did not do anything bad, but he did too many good things. The maids in the house were all poor children. When they made mistakes, he was not willing to punish them severely. I was always the good guy and the bad guy. The farmlands that we rented out were not of good years. They said that they received IOU, but they piled up year after year. How could they ask for it back? How did they die? Since you are heroes who enforce justice on behalf of the heavens, why don't you just rob the rich to help the poor? Why do you have to kill everyone before you stop? The people you killed were all good people who were no worse than you. Su Fingnian said calmly, "The last time I saw my eldest sister who had married far away, I advised her to go home. She refused, saying that the first marriage depends on the family, and the second marriage depends on the body." I knew she was waiting for someone. The woman laughed and cried, "Did she wait?" Su Fingnian nodded and said, "She waited, but I would rather not wait." She turned her head and wiped her tears. She stopped drinking and sobbing. The two of them were silent. With a bang, the drunk woman knocked her head on the table. Her lips trembled as she stretched out a hand and said softly, "My daughter, if she was still alive, she should be this tall, right?" She raised her outstretched hand slightly, and the fingers of the hand that pressed against the table stiffened. "Taller." Su Fingnian said, "Ever since I picked up the blade and started practicing martial arts, I don't think I have done a single good deed that has anything to do with helping the weak. Today, I'll be unreasonable. Tell me who you want to kill, and I'll kill that person." She just turned her head and looked at this stranger who was becoming more and more unfamiliar. She asked, "If you kill someone, will my daughter be able to live and grow taller under my watch?" Su Fingnian carried the spring and autumn sword on his back and walked up the mountain. Chapter 523. Han Fang sat in front of the desk, caressing a golden saber with a diamond-shaped handle. It was a decorative saber with little practical use. He was thinking about when to pawn it for some money so that he could solve the urgent needs of the stockade. Putting down the golden saber, he saw a miniature ivory diamond sutra paperweight on the desk. Han Fang touched the densely engraved words on the paperweight with his fingers and sighed heavily. A single coin is enough to starve a hero to death. Han Fang lived on the upper floor of the loyalty hall. When he pushed open the window, he could see the apricot yellow flag that was erected on the bluestone square. Unlike many of the bandits in the stronghold who only wanted to live a good life, he had been keeping himself clean all these years. He did not abduct women up the mountain to be used as tools to satisfy his lust. In the past, when he went down the mountain to kill the rich and help the poor, or to block the roads and cut off the paths, he would distribute those delicate and pretty women to his subordinates. Song Kuei and Fong Dei, who sat in the top few positions, were not greedy for money. Their only hobby was to compete with each other for the affection of women and fight with each other. Every time, he and Zhang Xiuqing had to mediate between them to make peace. Just like this time, when Song Kuei was beheaded on the execution field, the wives and concubines he left behind in the stronghold would become the playthings of the rest of the brothers tonight. This was also the reason why Han Fang was unwilling to take any wives or concubines. As a bandit, few people could enjoy their old age in peace. It was already a blessing from God to be able to live to the age of half a century. The stronghold was at its peak. Excluding those who had families to feed, there were more than 200 brothers who could ride horses and kill people. They came and went like the wind. There were no military towns stationed soldiers in the hundreds of li around Mount Liui. The local government was not strong enough to suppress the bandits. When facing their own stronghold, they would be thanking the gods if they did not go to the government office and behead the officials row by row. However, now that the stronghold had lost its power, there were only a dozen or so capable subordinates. Many of those who used to be brothers in the past had died, and most of those who were still alive had gone to the other strongholds on the mountain. Those who were left behind were burdened by injuries and injuries. They were raised in the stronghold and had bad tempers. They either complained about the lack of fresh women or complained about the lack of wine and meat. Han Fang also knew that she was burdened by her reputation, so there were many things that she could not say, and she could not even show the slightest expression. Now, the only one who could speak the truth was Zhang Xiuqing, whose family background was similar to hers. It was not scary that the monkeys would scatter when the tree fell, but it was frightening when everyone pushed the tree away. Some of the nearby strongholds who used to rely on him for food spared no effort in luring gold, silver, and pretty girls to gather a large number of men and horses, and from time to time, they would bring their brothers to the foot of the mountain to kill to their heart's content. A few of the villages who used to have secret connections with Mount Liui were all wiped out without any consideration for old relationships. Those leaders were unscrupulous in doing things and were never particular about the means. Some of them even flirted with the government, military school, and constables, throwing large amounts of silver into their pockets and even helping the government to do the dirty work that should have been done by the government. Not long ago, an official who had a good relationship with the Silver Bottle Stronghold spent 500 taels of silver to privately hire villains from the stronghold to slaughter the entire family of a small official who was not from the village. Even a few young children were not spared. It was said that they were hung on a long spear just like that. Some other strongholds licked their faces and became willing dogs for the stewards of the Shin family's cottage, acknowledging their uncles as their godfathers. There was even a 40-year-old stronghold leader who took a young woman from the cottage as his godmother, just because she was the favored concubine of a ferocious demonic cultivator in the cottage. These shameless things, especially the collusion between the government and the bandits, were always despised by Han Fang. It was no wonder that such a large loyalty stronghold was declining. It was funny that the stronghold was able to disperse and not fall down thanks to Lady Green Bamboo at the foot of the mountain. If it were not for her half-year affair with one of the top demons in the cottage, the other big strongholds would have come over with real swords and spears to take over the stronghold. After 2 knocks on the door, Zhang Xiuqing pushed the door open and entered without waiting for a reply. He and Han Fang got along well and was also the military advisor in charge of the internal affairs of the stronghold. There was no need for him to be pretentious over the details. When Han Fang saw this trusted subordinate whom she had known for many years, her mood improved. She called out Zhang Xiuqing's name and smiled. "Fu Ling, can't sleep." Zhang Xiuqing's face was gloomy. Fang Dei and Hong Qian are fighting again. They even threatened to sign a life and death contract, saying that they cannot live under the same sky. They asked me to write the contract. In a fit of anger, I ignored both of them to save myself the trouble. Han Fang smiled. "Is it because of the concubine that Song Kuei bought from the brothel for 200 taels of silver?" Zhang Xiuqing snorted coldly. "They keep saying that they are willing to risk their lives for their brothers. In the end, they are still going against their brothers because of a woman. Han Fang said guiltily, I also know that the woman has been having an affair with Hong Qian for a long time. She should have entered his house. However, Fang Dai was envious and insisted on interfering. It was indeed unreasonable of him to spoil this good thing. Hong Qian went to private school for a few years in his early years and learned a lot about medicine and astrology from you. He also has a lot of ambition. This kid is only 24 or 25 years old and he wants to fight for a title and bring glory to his ancestors. If it wasn't for your nurturing, with his ability, he would have turned for the better and joined a family. If he changed to a village that has a good relationship with the government and secretly changed his household registration, he might have a chance to make a name for himself. Everyone in the village knows that Fang Dai is on good terms with me and he also considers himself as a child of the Han family. So it is my fault for making things difficult for you. Zhang Xiuqing's expression softened slightly. He waved his hand, First Master, you are exaggerating. Fu Ling just feels that it is a pity for this family business. Han Fang sighed softly, the sky wants to rain, and the mother wants to get married. There is nothing that can be done about it. Han Fang stood up and walked to the window with the chief strategist. The breeze caressed her face. She looked at the night scenery of the mountains under the bright moonlight. Her state of mind became calmer. Suddenly, she smiled, a village woman is like a village woman. No matter how pretty that vixen looks, she is still a village woman. Zhang Xiuqing smiled knowingly, Hong Qian and Fang Dai are just village men. They have never tasted the delicacies of the mountains and seas. Naturally, they will fight until their heads bleed. Look, aren't they already invited to the square to compete? Chapter 524. Han Fang pressed her hands on the windowsill, it doesn't matter. Fang Dai may look boorish, but he is actually more meticulous than a girl who is in love. He is full of schemes and he is only taking the opportunity to find trouble with Hong Qian. Now that the stronghold is in decline and the third position is vacant, he wants to take the lead and sit under his butt. Hong Qian has a good constitution and a good comprehension ability. His martial arts are improving steadily. Fang Dai can only rely on brute force to fight as soon as possible. After a year and a half, he won't have to compete with Hong Qian anymore. This black bull is too clever, but he doesn't know that Hong Qian's ambition doesn't lie here. Actually, if he makes more connections now, he might need to rely on Hong Qian to hold up the apricot yellow flag in the future. Fu Ling, I will teach Fang Dai a lesson later and make him know his place. You should also say a few words to Hong Qian who is half a disciple. We are really a father and a mother. It's tough. Zhang Xiuqing smiled and said, it's considered good. Compared to those stronghold chiefs who are grandchildren, we are at least considered as elders. The two of them looked at each other and smiled. Zhang Xiuqing frowned and asked, First Master, how should we deal with that scholar from Gusai Prefecture called Su Lang? Han Fang shook her head and said, don't bother about it. Today is different from the past. No matter if he is a scholar who is studying abroad or a spy sent by the government, we can't afford to offend him. The former is still okay, we can treat him with respect. If it is the latter, even if we can't afford to offend him, we can still hide from him. Zhang Xiuqing squinted his almond eyes and was filled with murderous aura, it doesn't matter. If the government really dares to send troops to kill us and leave us no way out, I just need to bring 10 elite brothers to sneak into the city and kill all the people in the backyard of these officials. Han Fang smiled and said, You, the heavenly monarch of thunder, don't look like a Jinren Fang. Zhang Xiuqing's eyes dimmed. He sighed and said, What Jinren? He's just a bandit in a Taoist robe. He only knows how to subdue demons and devils on paper. With a regretful look, Han Fang said, It's because the stockade is too small for Brother Fu Ling to display his talents and skills. If we could have been a little more powerful back then and had 300 brothers, we would have had enough power to ask for an official position. If we were recruited by the imperial court, we would have at least 6 or 7 official positions with real power in the inner circle and 30 or 40 official positions outside the inner circle. Not to mention brother-fulling strategic planning. With your identity as an outer circle disciple of the Taoist sect, you wouldn't have had to deal with the daily necessities in the stockade. Zhang Xiuqing stretched out 2 fingers and stroked his beard. He smiled broadly and said, "Life and death are decreed by fate. Riches and honor are in the hands of the heavens. Ordinary people like me can't force things." Han Fang's eyes widened. At the same time, the Taoist blurted out, "That's not right. Why did the devil show himself?" Han Fang glanced at the Taoist beside her from the corner of her eyes. On the martial arts field paved with bluestones, a group of people appeared out of nowhere. They were all wearing brocade clothes that were rarely seen on the mountain. Moreover, even if the bandits in the stockade wore silk clothes, it was inevitable that they would look like monkeys wearing hats. The dozen or so handsome men and beautiful women had a very good temperament, like immortals from heaven descending to the mortal world, making people jealous. The leading middle-aged man wore a wide-sleeved white robe and came barefoot. His face was like jade and he didn't carry a sword. However, there were several sword-wielding attendants beside him. Needless to say, such a magnificent scene was the arrival of the nobles from the Shin sect's thatched cottage on the Changle peak of the Liui mountain. When Han Fang saw that Hong Qian left the field and didn't fight with Fang Dai, he walked towards the graceful man who looked like a marquis in the mortal world and bowed respectfully. Han Fang's heart sank to the bottom. As expected, Hong Qian had secretly changed his allegiance and joined the cottage. Han Fang sneered. The Taoist Zhang Xiuqing was furious. He angrily scolded, "Bastard," and jumped out of the window and landed on the field. Fang Dai and the dozen or so brothers in the stockade who were watching the show were also on guard. Zhang Xiuqing pulled out the pine-patterned peach-wood sword from his back and pointed it at Hong Qian. He said in pain, "Hong Qian, the stockade has treated you well. Back then, you killed the soldiers and had no other way out. It was the master who took pity on your abilities and took you in. Why did you do such a disobedient thing?" Hong Qian's simple words made Zhang Xiuqing, who was half a master, speechless. People walked towards higher places. Hong Qian continued expressionlessly, "That's right. It was me who reported to Immortal Zhongli that a strange man tried to get close to Lady Qingzhu. Since Lady Qingzhu had entered the divine residence of the cottage, she should be a member of the cottage alive and a ghost of the cottage dead. She was unscrupulous. What's wrong with me telling the Immortal Master? Master, the Immortal Master has already promised me that as long as you are willing to leave the stockade, the Immortal Master will be merciful and there will be a place for you in the cottage. Isn't such great glory what you have been dreaming of for many years? I built a Qingyun ladder for you out of kindness. What's wrong with that?" Immortal Zhongli's trip this time was on the way and he didn't intend to argue with the stockade. He only went to take the lives of that adulterous couple. The man with bare feet on the ground finally spoke. Squinting his eyes, he said, "I heard that the 2 leaders of the Zhongli stockade are quite skilled. Otherwise, they would have been impostors like Hong Qian. They would just have changed their original surnames and be given the surname Zhongli. However, before that, I still want to see if they are worthy of my attention. I want to see how you, Zhang Xiuqing, beat the 13 towns at the border with your rod techniques and whether your swordsmanship can really attract thunder. If you disappoint me, I will flatten this stockade tonight and erase its name. This apricot yellow flag has long been an eyesore to the masters of the cottage. They are enforcing justice on behalf of the heavens, but they are actually doing evil. How ridiculous." The man raised his head and looked surprised. A young man with a sword on his back stood at the top of the flag. He was so angry that he laughed. "Little kid, you don't know your place. How dare you show off your insignificant skills in front of me? Hong Qian, go and cut down the flagpole." If he cut down the flag, it would be tantamount to forming a blood feud with the stockade. Hong Qian knew the severity of the situation, but he still gritted his teeth and ran forward, cutting down the flagpole with one strike. Zhang Xiuqing, who did not dare to stop Hong Qian in front of the devil from the cottage, had an ashen face. Zhongyi stockade was completely finished. The flagpole suddenly fell towards the center of the square. However, the traveling scholar who only dared to fight with a widow at the foot of the mountain did not lose his footing and fall to the ground. His body was still as straight as a spear. When he landed with the flagpole that had fallen to the ground swayed and was kicked out by him. The flagpole was used as a sword and shot towards the carefree devil from the cottage. Hong Qian shouted angrily and slashed down with his sword. Unexpectedly, when the sharp blade hit the flagpole, not only did it not break the flagpole, but a huge force also rebounded into the sword. He almost could not hold the sword. Hong Qian, whose ocean of qi was churning, staggered back a few steps. He looked over in shock and could no longer see the weak scholar. The devil from the cottage, whose surname was Zhongli, sneered. He stepped out and pressed his palm on one end of the flagpole, breaking it inch by inch. There was no doubt that he was an expert. Everyone only saw the scene of him breaking through the flagpole but did not see that he had quietly slid back a few inches. The devil tried to raise his qi several times but could not stop himself from retreating. The fear in his eyes was no less than Hong Qian's. When he saw the young swordsman disappear in a flash, he finally could not hold it in and said in a low voice, "Sword, come." The sword boy hurriedly threw out a simple ancient sword covered with ice cracks. The next scene was that the young man stood in front of the famous middle-aged devil of Mount Liui. One of his hands overstepped his authority and caught the ancient sword for his master. The other hand grabbed the devil's neck and lifted him up. The devil broke a flag, but the young man twisted the ancient sword in his hand and broke it inch by inch. Su Fingyan stared at the ferocious red face and asked coldly, "Do you deserve to use a sword? Do you deserve to use the word sword, come?" Chapter 525. Su Fingyan casually threw away the useless sword that was once known to cut jade like mud and asked again, "Who allowed you to say the word sword?" Normally, if someone dared to be so arrogant and rude, he would be chopped into minced meat and fed to the dogs with his sword. However, this young man, who was even more of a devil than him, was stronger than him. He struggled to gasp and said, "I heard that the sword Immortality Chungang of the Liang dynasty once said that he was a model for swordsmen of our generation, so I secretly learned and used it. If young master is dissatisfied, Zhongli Handan, won't say it again. I won't say it again for the rest of my life." Zhongli Handan's face turned from red to purple as he gasped and said, "I heard that the sword Immortality Chungang of the Liang dynasty once said that he was a model for swordsmen of our generation, so I secretly learned and used it. If young master is dissatisfied, Zhongli Handan, will never say it again." Su Fingyan responded with an "oh" and raised his hand. He slapped the side of the head of this immortal from the cottage. Then, his head was pulled out of the body and rolled far away like a watermelon. Su Fingyan threw away the headless body and laughed softly. "Sword and lie are such common words. It must be very difficult for you to keep your promise. In order not to break your promise, I have to help you." When the servant boy who handed Zhongli Handan the sword saw his master die suddenly, he did not care about anything else. He also did not think deeply about why his master died in one move. He only thought that he was tricked by a villain and was careless. He snatched the famous sword from the other servant who was holding the sword. After he pulled out the sword with a clang, he angrily rebuked with red eyes, "You crazy country bastard, do you know that Master Zhongli is the next hut master of Shenmen's straw hut? I will tear you into pieces and let you die without a burial place." In the eyes of Han Fang, Zhang Xiuqing and the others who were not weak in martial arts, the sword boy's sword strike was not to be underestimated. The 5 fingers of Su Fingyan's left hand hooked into a claw, and the head that was dripping with blood flew back out of thin air. Coincidentally, it was split into two by the sword boy's sword. However, the splattering blood was all bounced off by a layer of fata morgana. On the other hand, the domineering sword boy's face was covered in blood. His sword chopped open his master's head, and it hovered 3 to 4 inches above the sword-carrying scholar's head. Su Fengnian slowly raised his arm and flicked the sword away from the sword boy's hand with a flick of his finger. The sword broke free from the sword boy's hand and slapped his white cheek. Instantly, a long red mark as wide as the sword body appeared. After the ancient sword with a rare cat's eye stone inlaid in the sword guard left Su Fengnian's hand, it strangely pulled back into Su Fengnian's hand and cracked inch by inch. Su Fengnian smiled at the stunned sword boy and said, "I have never even heard of Shinmen's thatched hut. How would I know who this piece of trash with a broken head is? Your master has just gone to hell. Since you are so loyal, why don't you accompany him? Otherwise, with your peerless swordsmanship of splitting Mount Hua, I believe that you will be buried with him when you return to the cottage." Only then did the sword boy realize the difference between the two of them. He had just said a word when his body was kicked like a drawn bow and flew out 5 to 6 feet away. He spat out blood and died. Su Fengnian then asked, "What do you want to say?" In the square, two groups of people with different standpoints were both shocked. Hong Qian quietly moved, wanting to escape from this troublesome place. After cutting down the flag, he had already cut off all ties with the loyal and righteous stronghold. There was no room for negotiation. The big backer that he had found with great difficulty died on the spot. Not to mention how this bloody swordsman would deal with him, just his master, Zhang Xiuqing, and the leader, Han Fang, were enough to make him suffer. Just as he slipped to the edge of the square, Su Fengnian turned around and stared at this bandit who spared no effort to climb up the ranks. He smiled and said, "Leader Hong, don't be in a hurry to leave. This apricot yellow flag was cut down by you because of the grudge between you and the stronghold. It has nothing to do with me. However, I heard from Qing Zhu's mother that when her husband's manor was broken into, it was also you who hid your identity and became a guest of the manor for a few months. Then, you cooperated from the inside and stabbed that scholar to death. Many of the pretty maids who used to joke with you were also killed that night after you lifted up your belt. Since Zhongli Handan is dead, come, if you are lucky enough to beat me, Qing Zhu's mother will be your plaything in the tent." Hong Qian's face was full of bitterness and regret. He said, "Young Master Su, you must be joking. How would I dare to be disrespectful to you?" The Taoist priest, Zhang Xiuqing, suddenly said loudly, "I beg young Master Su to leave this person to me. After this, if you want to kill me, I, Zhang Xiuqing, will not fight back. Do as you wish." Su Fengnian asked back, "That day at the wine shop at the foot of the mountain, didn't you want to cut off my head with your sword?" Zhang Xiuqing said calmly, "As long as young Master Su is willing to let go of the loyal and righteous stronghold, I, Zhang Xiuqing, kill Hong Qian, and I will apologize with my life." Su Fengnian smiled and spread out his hands, indicating that Zhang Xiuqing should go all out to kill and clean up the place. Su Fengnian looked at the apricot yellow flag with the word vermilion written on it and said to himself, "It's not wrong for the government to force the people to rebel." However, after eating wine and meat, they changed from being unarmed to holding weapons. In the end, the people who killed the most were the people like you. Who is the one doing justice for whom? Su Fengnian looked at the group of shivering cottage servants. Since even the king of the mountain was dead, what else could he do? Su Fengnian turned his head and said to Han Fang, "Leader Han, can you lend me 7 or 8 horses to go with me to the Shinmen's thatched cottage to see the wonderland on earth?" Han Fang clasped his hands and said loudly, "I dare not disobey." A few bandits from the Zhongyi stockade brought over a dozen horses from the stable with fear. They were afraid that this handsome guy, who was even more devilish than a devil, would think that there were too few horses and that he was not observant enough and would kill them all. That would be really unjust. Hong Qian was already entangled by Zhang Xiuqing. A few strong men stood still and formed a circle. Against the famous anonymous disciple of the Dowd clan, Zhang Xiuqing, Hong Qian originally had no chance of winning. Moreover, most of his martial arts were taught by Zhang Xiuqing. His shortcomings were exposed and he was targeted everywhere. Fang Dai, who was eyeing him covetously, saw an opportunity. He waved his axe and cut a big wound on Hong Qian's back. Hong Qian no longer had the strength to scold this black bull for not following the rules. At this moment, Su Fengnian, who had just pulled the reins and was about to jump on the horse, flashed past. He grabbed the flag with the words, "Justice for Heaven," in his hand and rushed behind Fang Dai. He slapped his back. Before the strong man fell, his head was wrapped up by the flag. Like a dumpling, he was slowly suffocated to death. A cool breeze blew in the square, but it made everyone fall into an ice cellar. After Hong Qian's chest was pierced by Zhang Xiuqing's sword, he laughed and said, "It's good to die. All of you died happily. I will still be a man in my next life. I only hope that God will let Han Fang, Zhang Xiuqing and the rest of you become women." Without waiting for him to finish his last words, Zhang Xiuqing's sword pierced his heart and lungs. Su Fengnian glanced at the apricot-eyed Taoist and said calmly, "Since Lady Qing Zhu said that you still have some sage-like demeanor, I will spare your life. As for what to do in the future, wait for me and Leader Han to come back and make a decision." Chapter 526. Unexpectedly, this Taoist priest was also decisive. He waved away the blood on the tip of his sword and held a peachwood sword upside down. He bowed and said directly, "There's no need for such trouble. Zhang Xiuqing is willing to go to the cottage with Mr. Su." Su Fengnian ordered the cottage attendants coldly, "Bring Zhongli Handan's head with 2 parts." The group rode to Changle Peak, which was 2 hours away. There was actually a luxurious carriage outside the Zhongli village. However, since Su Fengnian did not want to sit in it, no one dared to make trouble. The sects that had the right to occupy a mountain and call themselves kings were mostly rich and powerful. The ones that were far away were like Dragon Tiger Mountain and Huishan Xinyuan, which were opposite each other across the river. The ones that were closer were like Qingyang Palace. They all had thousands of followers. Not to mention the clan leaders, even some small fries were high up in the sky. In the eyes of ordinary people, they only felt like they were covered by clouds and mist. Naturally, they would be in awe. The Shin family thatched cottage was the king of the Liui mountain. However, the devil in front of them, who was grabbed by the neck like a wild duck, liked to call himself an immortal. His strength was among the top 5 in the cottage. A few years ago, it was rumored that he was close to rank 2. According to the details that Su Fengnian learned from Qing Zhu, the cottage had about 2 rank 2 masters. For a state like the Orange State, it was indeed not bad. The owner of the cottage had the surname Shin. This person with the surname Zhongli was the dishonorable illegitimate son of the owner of the cottage. However, he was quite talented in martial arts and had the chance to reach rank 2 before the age of 40. Whether he was an illegitimate son or not, it did not matter. The reason why the Shin family thatched cottage was labeled as a devil sect was because they were good at sex and tantrism. In the end, as long as it was related to sex, the cottage was good at it. When the disciples of the Shin family went down the mountain, they either killed their parents or kidnapped their young tripod furnaces. They also escorted mature tripod furnaces to high officials and dignitaries. They even had business dealings with some relatives of the 2 surnames in the Beimang imperial tent. This was also the reason why the thatched cottage could be so wealthy. In fact, although the tantrism had always been criticized as heretical, some of the orthodox supernatural powers that originated from Buddhist scriptures were not distorted. This was probably the key reason why the Shin family had so many pillars of martial arts. Han Fang did not say anything. She rode beside this scholar at night. However, Her thoughts were running wild. Since he was traveling with his sword, he had slapped the devil Zhongli's head without using his sword. Didn't that mean that he had reached rank 2? How many years had this scholar, who called himself Su Lang, been in his 20s? However, she was not optimistic about Su Lang going to the Shen family's thatched cottage. He was forced to go because he had no other choice. He could not be like the servant boy who died on the spot after saying no. However, she had a headache about how to weigh the pros and cons after arriving at the cottage. Not to mention other things, the cottage had 2 elders from the Shen family who had been in the 2nd rank for a long time. Would Su Lang not care about his life when he had not even drawn his sword out of its scabbard behind him? Or was he confident? Zhang Shuqing followed behind him. He only felt that this scholar had a strong sense of hostility. It was like the ink that was ground out of a top-grade ancient inkstone. It was unusually thick. Su Fengnian was holding a sword that the sword boy had taken from him. It was modeled after the bronze sword of the Donghua sword pool. It was thick, black, and simple. Su Fengnian let go of the reins. He held the sword with one hand and flicked his fingers with the other. The sound was crisp and melodious. He suddenly asked, people like Fang Dei have the habit of swinging their axes and killing people in the busy streets without asking about the right and wrong. Do they only feel satisfied and not have the slightest bit of mercy? Han Fang mocked herself and was about to speak. Zhang Shuqing was the first to speak. Fang Dei and Hong Qian, these outlaws, were not soft-hearted people before they came to the mountain. They were all people who killed without blinking an eye. They acted on impulse and did not distinguish right from wrong. To their own brothers, they were naturally worthy of praise for their righteousness. This is just like the so-called killing their children and raising their mothers in the 24 filial piety of the Central Plains. They are all crazy. In the end, they go against common sense. In the end, the loyalty of the brothers depended on Fang Dei and these boorish fellows. Those who were literate and quick-witted were rarely willing to hang themselves on a single tree. Later on, Zhongyi village was pushed aside by the other villages of Mount Liui, and the birds and beasts scattered. Those who scattered were precisely these brothers who had knowledge in their stomachs. After joining other families, they turned around and wreaked havoc on Zhongyi village, sparing no effort. The 3rd boss Song Kue was tricked by one of his former brothers into going to the city, which was why he ended up in prison. Of course, not everyone is so despicable. Many brothers who went up the mountain but did not form a gang or faction to establish a foothold were disheartened, and after going down the mountain, they were still affectionate and loyal to the Zhongyi stronghold. It can be said that they parted on good terms. Su Fengnian nodded and said, at the foot of the mountain, I asked Qing Junyang for advice on many methods of running a village. I more or less know that it is not easy for you. Zhang Shuqing couldn't help but curse in his heart. I beg you, this great devil, to stop asking for advice. You already have such fierce and unparalleled skills and supernatural powers. Could it be that you want to learn from us and build a stronghold for fun? Zhang Shuqing's heart was heated. Could it be that Mount Liui was going to change? Han Fang also had a telepathic connection. The two of them knew each other. Their gazes met and then flashed away. A sword boy who picked up the luxurious sword inlaid with cat's eye stone from the square came riding over. He anxiously reported, Young master, someone is sneaking away. In fact, Su Fengnian had already known the truth from the sound of the horse's hooves. However, it was unnecessary for him to turn his head and look. The ruthless sword boy, who had probably learned most of his skills from his master, used the sword as a dagger and took the opportunity to stab Su Fengnian's neck. Even Han Fang and Zhang Shuqing did not expect this sword boy to be so daring. His unyielding character was even more obvious. Su Fengnian gently threw the bronze sword in his hand. It stabbed into the back of the escaping cottage servant and he fell off the horse. 2 fingers easily pinched the tip of the sword. The 2 horses were still riding side by side. Su Fingnian did not immediately kill the servant. He only pulled out the valuable sword and then smiled. Go to the corpse and pull out the sword. As for whether you want to escape or not, it's up to you. The sword boy was stunned on the spot. Then, he broke down and burst into tears. Su Fingnian turned the sword around and kicked him. The sword boy, who had just come back to his senses and was about to pull out the sword, flew out like a kite and hit the mountain wall. He stopped breathing and died. Zhang Shuqing was as silent as a cicada in winter. How could this devil's character be more unpredictable than his methods? Su Fingnian, who was sitting steadily on the horse, threw the sword to Han Fang. He put his hands in his sleeves and squinted his phoenix eyes to look at the road in front of him. He remembered the harsh days when he saw thieves armed with knives and sticks as his mortal enemy. Every time he crossed over a mountain, there was a young girl who was determined to be a heroine who would happily shout that the king asked her to patrol the mountain. She would patrol the South Mountain and the North Mountain. At the end of each sentence, she would not forget to make incessant moans. Su Fingnian said calmly, "If you, a heroine, knew that you were going up the mountain just to kill people, would you still call me your good brother?" There was another chapter at around 2:00 in the morning. It was to thank the new top scorer on the 13th, Grey Shepherd, v. Gale Altar. As for the new top scorer on the 14th, young Master Fu Shu, his outburst came later. Chapter 527. Su Fingnian went up the mountain because he wanted to learn from Li Chungang and kill thousands of soldiers by himself. Although he did not bring spring thunder with him, he was still nourishing it. Su Fingnian had already noticed that he had accumulated too much killing intent and hostility. If this continued, he would go crazy sooner or later. When that happened, Beiliang would lose a hereditary king of Beiliang, and Beimang would gain a new demon who would kill without batting an eyelid. After asking about the family background of Shenmen's cottage, he learned that other than the two old men who were above the common populace, there were 4 or 5 masters, who were as strong as Zhongli Handan. For the Orange Province, where there were many military towns, they were already bold enough to survive in the cracks. Beimang ruled the Jianghu with an iron fist. Among the 5 major sects, Tibbing Mountain, which was no different from a military town, was ranked 3rd. The chess and sword music school was ranked last. Because there was Hong Jingyan, who was on the Wushu rankings, holding the flag, as well as the master of the sword mansion, Jian Qi, and a few other hidden masters, no one dared to look down on them. With these 5 beasts who absorbed the resources of the Jianghu like whales swallowing whales, there was an insurmountable gap between the superclass sects and the first-class sections. Su Fingnian did not find this strange. Beimang only used such methods so that they could gather the strength of the Jianghu at the start of the war and integrate it into the army to deal a heavy blow to the Liang dynasty. Looking at it this way, when Su Shao entered the Jianghu on horseback and broke the Jianghu, there were pros and cons. For the imperial court, it was a headache. However, once the backbone was crushed and the backbone was broken, the Jianghu would lose its vitality. Su Fingnian shot a glance at Han Fang. This stick-wielding hero who sat at the head of Zhongyi's stronghold came from a prestigious family. The Han family was the cornerstone of the strategic border region, Ji province, for 100 years. It was unknown just how many waves of northern Mang invasions they had withstood. The old man of the Han family had once led 800 elite cavalry to charge its 60 to 70,000 northern Mang soldiers. After identifying the location of the royal flag, they directly slaughtered their way over, their military achievements illustrious. This was not an exaggeration in unofficial history. It was always recognized by the internal court historians who were strict with history, and was written with rich ink and color. With the Han family controlling a few key passes in Ji province, it caused the Beimang's cavalry to go south for the first 40 years. Countless times they hit a wall. They were so hurt that they simply took a detour. Because of this, the Han family had always been regarded as a big problem by the Beimang imperial tent. The Han family could be said to be fiercely loyal. Interestingly, in the past 100 years, no matter what the emperor's surname was, as long as you sat on the dragon throne and wore the dragon robe, the Han family would be loyal and devoted. They would do everything they could to guard the border for you. The Han family members of the Han family would not hesitate to die again and again, and the number of direct descendants who died on the battlefield was countless. Until 10 years ago, Zhang Julu and Gu Jiantang took the initiative to rotate the border towns. The two Liao provinces, where the Beimang army started, especially Jinzhou, rebelled fiercely and almost caused the first mutiny after the spring and autumn period. Next was the Han family of Ji province. Although the Han family did not express any dissatisfaction and even started to move, for some reason, there was a mutiny in Ji province overnight. This gave rise to a famous saying from Zhang Julu, "The emperor is not anxious, but the eunuchs are." The emperor. This was tantamount to setting the standard for the turmoil in Jizhou. The Han family had 100 people, but they were all executed. Afterwards, they were transferred to the border army. Han Fang was listed as a traitor on the Han family's genealogy. However, the Liang dynasty was too far away to reach. It was unlikely that they would come to the hinterland of Juzhou to kill this traitor. Years ago, Su Xiao and his second sister, Su Weisheng, sat around the stove on a snowy night and talked about the world. When they talked about the Han family in Jizhou who had no hope of being avenged, Su Xiao only said one sentence: "In the end, Master Han still did not have enough soldiers." His second sister lightly added, "The imperial court was certain that the Han family would not rebel because of the burden of loyalty and righteousness. Therefore, they deserved to die even more. One needle to the blood, two needles to the bone." Su Fengnian once curiously asked Su Xiao if he was the one who purposely led Bai Liang and the Tu Liao to Jizhou. Su Xiao asked him in return, "Take a guess." At that time, Su Fengnian's temper was as irritable as the dragons in the prince's mansion. He scolded, "Take a guess, your grandpa." Su Xiao only had a good temper with his children. He still smiled and replied, "Am I not your father? Take another guess." Then, the young Su Fengnian was completely speechless. At that time, his second sister, who had not yet gone to the Shangyin Academy to study, held her belly and laughed for the first time. Finally, they approached the Shen family's thatched hut. One servant of the Shen family was kicked to death, another stabbed to death with a sword. Those who survived no longer had the arrogance they had when they came down the mountain and entered the stronghold. Even when they were about to enter their own territory, they did not dare to show any emotion. They still kept a straight face and rode behind the scholar carrying the sword. On Changla Peak, there were rows upon rows of bamboo buildings. Thousands of large red lanterns were hung high up. The decorated archway had the 4 words, 6 Fatian Peaks, hanging on it. The 2 pillars were made of incomparably expensive golden-threaded cedar wood, which was the wood that needed to be wrapped around. Golden-threaded cedar wood was originally purchased by the government for the imperial family. The construction of the main hall and the pillars of the mausoleum were all made of high-quality jinan, and the golden-threaded cedar wood was the best quality. During the spring and autumn period, the Central Plains, Western Shu, and Southern Tang, and a few other countries, every few years, there would be 1 or 2 cases where dozens of heads would fall to the ground. In the current dynasty, there was even a comical scandal where the emperor of the Zhao family stole precious jinan wood under the guise of repairing West Chu's imperial mausoleum. Because the golden-threaded cedar wood itself had the effect of a sea of clouds, it did not need to be carved to dazzle people. Su Fengnian rode past the decorated archway and turned his head to look at the golden-threaded cedar pillars. He clicked his tongue and said, "What a wealthy family." It was the first time that Han Fang and Zhang Shiqing personally came to the Shen family's thatched cottage. Apart from the eye-opening experience, they were also very worried. The richer the Shen family was, the more likely they would be buried with them. How could they smile? Su Fengnian looked at the 2 groups of people rushing out from the 2 sides of the main building and said to himself, "Su Fengnian, remember, don't treat a level 2 master like a joke. Su Fengnian turned around and stretched out his hand. He said calmly, give it to me. A cottage retinue hurriedly threw over the bag that was soaked in blood and rode forward. The horse's hooves stepped on the white jade square, which was exceptionally loud. From 100 steps away, Su Fengnian casually threw out the bag that contained Zhongli Handan's 2 severed heads and stared at an old man with a white beard that reached his chest. Chapter 528. Not everyone could make the head of the Shen family get up from his white belly in the middle of the night and personally go out to receive them. However, since there was a saying that one had a high vantage point, of course, there would be benefits to living high up. The disciples of the Shen family who were responsible for the night watch had already spread the news. Layer by layer, the situation became more and more intense. Only then did the old man, who had not cared about worldly affairs for many years, notice. Zhongli Handan was his illegitimate son. After it was confirmed that he had the potential to enter rank 2 in the prime of his life, he gradually had high hopes placed on him and was highly valued by the cottage. Many of the resources that originally belonged to the eldest son began to be tilted towards Zhongli Handan. Even when he killed a concubine who had killed his own mother, the cottage did not punish him. Later on, he strangled another concubine to death with a white silk cloth. Only then was he punished to be locked up in the word sword study at the back of the mountain for a year. In fact, he was only suppressed to practice martial arts and browse secret manuals. Tonight, there was clearly an important guest who had just visited the residence. After that, Zhongli Handan secretly left the mountain in a carriage. This was not a big deal. What was surprising was that when he came back, he was nowhere to be seen. How could the cottage, who had spent a lot of money and effort on him, be at ease? The two sides were in a standoff. A disciple of the Shen family who had a slender bronze sword received a signal from his eyes. He jogged over to open the bag and was shocked as if he had seen a ghost. It was almost there. It was not a ghost. It was just the head of a dead person. The swordsman who had his back facing the family had a complicated expression. After he turned around, he hid the ecstasy in his eyes that was hidden very deeply. With a face full of grief, he said in a trembling voice, "Head of the hut, Zhongli Handan is dead." The head of the hut was extremely angry. The long beard in front of his chest fluttered. He lifted the iron cane that weighed hundreds of kilograms and heavily smashed it into the jade ground, creating a hole. He shouted, "Who are you?" Su Fengnian did not pull the reins. He put his hands in his sleeves and carried the spring and autumn sword on his back. He sat still on the horse and said calmly, "To be honest, this is the first time I've met this cottage swordsman who calls himself Zhongli Handan. We have no grudges against each other." However, he said, "Sword come," and said that he wanted to imitate sword god Li's style on the snowy plains. However, he didn't send thousands or hundreds of swords. He only asked his servant to throw a broken sword over. I really couldn't stand it anymore and coincidentally wanted to kill him so much that I went crazy, so I slapped his head off. If the Shen family cottage can't stand it anymore, why don't you take turns fighting me? The head of the hut was so gloomy that the nearby disciples of the Shen family trembled and did not dare to look at him. The old man who had been in the second rank for much longer than the young man on the horse with a sword on his back held his cane tightly. He was full of murderous intent. Squinting his eyes, he asked, "Which school are you from?" Su Fengnian said with a look of surprise, "I've already killed your son, and you're still nagging me. Am I your father?" Han Fong and Zhang Shuqing looked at each other. They were considered experienced people in the Jianghu, but they had never seen such a master who was like a ruffian in the marketplace. Good, good, good. The head of the hut was so angry that he laughed loudly. He pressed his hands on the huge luminous pearl that was held in the dragon's mouth at the top of the cane. Regardless of whether they were under the protection of the cottage or the direct descendants of the Shen family, there were a total of 60 people present. Among them, there were 13 archers on both sides. However, people continued to enter the field. Ordinary people would get lost if they walked in. With such a big family, news would inevitably be delayed. It was like a stone being thrown into the heart of the lake. It would take some time for the ripples to spread to the lake. Su Fengnian silently said to himself, "If you want to kill me, you will be responsible for your own life." Su Fengnian floated down from the horse. His elegance was out of this world. The first wave of water splashing from the crossbow was already in front of him. Su Fengnian slid a few feet and easily dodged the flying arrows. The poor tall horse was shot into a hedgehog in an instant and fell to the ground with a loud bang. A strong man with a broad sword rushed forward in large strides, not giving him any chance to attack. Su Fengnian suddenly sped up. When he brushed past the man, he waved his sleeve and the man's huge body flew to the side. Just the sound of the man's shoulder breaking was very shocking. The three swordsmen from the cottage who followed him knew that things were not going well. In an instant, they set up the tripartite sword formation, which could be considered common in the Jianghu. The blades of the swords were dazzling. Su Fengnian spread out his hands and grabbed the tips of two swords. His body flipped back and dodged the middle sword. The two swordsmen between his fingers immediately twisted. One of the swordsmen who was smarter and more cunning also did a flip to prevent his sword from falling out of his hand. The other swordsman's movements were slower. The swordsman who managed to save his face secretly felt lucky. A force surged from the tip of his sword to his wrist. His body was fiercely pulled forward by the force. Just as he was about to abandon his sword and retreat, Su Fengnian held his sword and moved to the side like a fish swimming in water. The back of his hand suddenly hit the swordsman's chest, who was caught off guard. A cloud of scarlet blood spurted out. When the swordsman stumbled back, Su Fengnian raised his leg, which was not higher than his knee. He kicked the swordsman's calf with a huge force, causing his body to fly forward. Then, he hit the man's forehead with his knee. Bloom! The swordsman fell on the white jade slab. He only twitched twice symbolically before he quickly died with the ups and downs of his life. Su Fengnian flicked his sleeves, and the second wave of arrows shot by the crossbowmen fell into two treacherous vortexes. In the end, they were stabbed in the opposite direction. Only those who were quick enough to dodge were able to escape, but there were still 3 crossbowmen who died. Most of the people in Shenmen Cottage were swordsmen. 7 people, 7 swords, and 7 swords were released instantly. Every sword carried a strong momentum that did not care about life or death. It seemed that these Jianghu heroes were also stimulated. Every sword attacked the enemy's vital points. Su Fengnian was not in a hurry to kill the enemy and break the array. He glided like a fish, as if he was taking a leisurely stroll. The slender figure with the sword on his back dodged elegantly. Except for a few swords that pierced his lower body and moved a little, the other dozens of swords that were released in 7 or 8 breaths could not make his feet leave the ground. This scholarly young man's body rose and fell like the tide, but he did not fall. No matter how many swords attack, my feet will take root. A man in purple with a golden crown who was calmly watching the battle stood beside the master of the cottage. After seeing his father nod, he unsheathed his sword like a dragon's roar. The sword aura was faintly lingering. In the gap between the 7 swords, he stabbed viciously towards Su Fengnian's heart. Su Fengnian formed a circle with his hands and covered the long sword. The green sword aura that was close to his heart could not pierce forward. His palms drew a circle again and the sword followed. The man in purple who looked like Zhongli Handan frowned slightly. He did not forcefully hold the sword. Instead, he pushed his palm on the sword hilt and finally pushed it forward a few inches. Su Fengnian floated back and dodged the attack and the 7 swords. The crossbowmen who were watching the situation immediately released the 3rd wave of arrows. They did not want to kill the enemy, but they did not want to give the swordsman a chance to breathe. The moment of breathing was like the moment of yin and yang. Those evenly matched life and death battles competed on the exquisiteness of breathing. Of course, there was also the degree of vigor. Both sides strangled each other like needles pricking each other. It was a matter of who leaked more slowly. Back then at the riverbank. In the blink of an eye, an old man wearing a sheepskin fur coat killed 600 iron armors with a single breath that circulated for 800 li. Su Fengnian, who had entered the initial stage of the Great Vajra realm, did not advance. Instead, he retreated, causing the arrow rain to miss again. The man in purple's expression changed slightly. He used his chi to control his sword and retreated with the sword. The mirage expanded and resisted 6 swords. His 5 fingers formed a hook and pressed down on a head. The majestic vigor at the tip of his fingers caused the head to explode. His hands rolled up his sleeves and tied his hair. The remaining 6 swords completely lost their aim. After a series of messy collisions, they no longer had their original order. Su Fengnian used the half-baked Hujia's 18 slaps that he stole. In the blink of an eye, he killed 6 swordsmen who died with their eyes wide open. Su Fengnian, who was standing among the corpses, raised Kunlun with both hands. He closed his eyes and said softly, "Old Manly, why don't you open your eyes and watch me kill a few people in one breath?" Chapter 529. 6 corpses that had been slapped to death by Hu Shao lay on the jade square with the scholar in the center. Blood flowed everywhere. After this battle, the archers were all stunned and forgot to shoot the next wave of arrows. The long-bearded hut owner shouted angrily, "Disciples of the Shen family, go first." 2 encirclements were formed in an instant. The small circle was made up of more than 20 members of the Shen family, mixed with the men of sacrifice cultivated by the cottage. The outer circle was made up of more than 40 guests of the Changle Peak. As the battle became more and more intense, more than 30 people rushed into the white jade square. The small circle suddenly shrank. More than 20 swords and knives combined. Su Fengnian's left foot moved about an inch, his hands raised to break the river and shake the Kunlun mountains. Together with the knot of black hair that the blind Guqin player had learned by imitating Hu Zhao's rhythm, he had the demeanor of a great grandmaster. His body swayed and his chi flowed east like a long river. The disciples of the Shen family had been practicing martial arts since they were young. They were blessed by nature when it came to training their bodies. They also had superior secret manuals and masters to guide them. The 20 swords and knives attacked in a strict manner. Although they were defeated by the mighty chi, the small circle recovered and spread. Only a few people's swords and knives left their hands and were destroyed. Most people were safe and sound. The few who lost their weapons almost simultaneously caught the upper-class swords and knives thrown by the people in the big circle behind them. The circle shrank and stretched, showing the power of the Shen family cottage. West Shu had the largest dragon wall in the world. It was even bigger than the current 9-dragon wall in the Liang imperial city. When Li Chungang used 3,000 streaks of sword chi to roll across it, it was called the opening Shu style. Su Fengnian, who had fought against more than 60 martial artists alone, silently said, "Sword, rise." Su Fengnian used Wudong Wang Zhongluo's one-finger Kanglen style to start. The spring and autumn sword on his back was unsheathed. The sword chi covered the entire Changle Peak. Spring and autumn flashed by. Su Fengnian stomped his feet fiercely, creating 2 pits on the jade floor. Between heaven and earth, there was a stream of splendor, like a flowing comet. Compared to the somewhat crude swallow-circling flying sword of the past, it truly surpassed the realm by too many levels. It was already close to the level of the Wu family's sword mound. At the Battle of the Reed Marsh, when Zhao Luding faced Li Chuangong's 2-sleeved green snake, he did not panic in the face of danger. He borrowed the second most famous sword of the age, the Su of Gojoseon, from the hands of the sword attendant. This was drawing chi to control the sword. Su Fengnian, in an extremely rude and unreasonable manner, continued to slap randomly. This was a summary of the main points. On the other hand, the spring and autumn sword chi rolled out like a huge net. Wherever the sword chi reached, not only did it engulf the 20 people in the small circle, it also engulfed the 40 people in the big circle. The sword pierced through his neck, his chest, and his leg. The sword came and went, and the chi was endless. The father and son of the Shin family were two of the three master realm cultivators on Changle Peak. The father and son had reached rank 2 one after another, which was a fantastic story in the underworld of the Orange State. It could be said that a tiger father would not have a dog son. The reason why Shinji had high hopes for his illegitimate son, Zhongli Handan, was because he was waiting for the day when 3 Master Realm cultivators appeared in Changle Peak. This would undoubtedly help the cottage close the gap between them and the top 10 sections. The younger generation of the Shin family had many talented martial arts geniuses. As long as they did their best to raise a rank 1 expert within 30 years, the Shin family would be qualified to enter the eyes of the Northern Mang imperial court and would be supported by large amounts of people, money, and resources. The rich would get richer. This was the underworld of the Northern Mang. Not only did the imperial court allow the small sects to eat shrimps, they would also take the initiative to help the big sects to eat the small ones. If they did not move forward, they would fall behind. In Dunhuang City, which was 600 miles away, the city lord was like a king who had established his own sect. He was called the Second King by Little Emperor Wu. He had long wanted to devour the Shin family cottage. If it were not for the fact that the Changle Peak and the royal family had built up a huge amount of incense, which allowed several military towns to stand between them and were willing to stop the Dunhuang city forces from invading the south, the cottage would have been devoured long ago. Living in peace, one would not think about danger. The 40 or so sects within 300 miles of Dunhuang City were examples. The death of one person in the cottage meant that there would be more danger. How could Shinji not be worried? The purple-robed swordsman from the eldest branch of the cottage squinted his eyes and said gloomily, "If we don't get rid of this person, how can the cottage stand in Mount Liui? Should I ask Grandpa to come out?" The cottage master shook his head and seemed to ask himself, "Isn't the price too high?" The middle-aged man retorted in a low voice, "Are we going to let this person kill everyone in the square?" The long-bearded cottage master squinted his eyes and said, "No hurry. Wait until he stops breathing, then you can test him again." The next cottage master, who was more elegant than Zhongli Handan, said angrily, "If we still can't take him down, what should we do? If we lose face, we will be hurt. Those bastards in Dunhuang City love to take advantage of every opportunity. Won't the cottage be in danger? If the cottage is destroyed, how can the descendants of the Shin family live a peaceful life? We can't learn from those filthy village leaders and take the Dunhuang City Lord as our godmother and be her slave, right? The messenger from Dunhuang City on the mountain has a seductive face and a plump body. She is like a concubine in the palace. However, her heart is vicious and her tone is lawless. She just came and already said that she wants the entire Shin family of the cottage to be the fake sons of Dunhuang City. How can I tolerate that?" Shinji frowned and said, "Don't try to goad me. Nobody knows my son better than his father. Do you really think that I'm old and dim-witted for all the tricks you've done in secret all these years? You blame me for not being willing to rely on Murong Baoding and not paving the way for you in the military world. So, you secretly made friends with the henchmen who hold the decree. Shinkaiha, do you still think that I am your father?" Shinkaiha's face was distorted and he sneered, "My mother was strangled to death by Zhongli Handan's illegitimate son with a piece of white silk. However, you don't even allow me to take revenge. What kind of father are you?" The old man held the iron crutch tightly. He was angry at first and then sad. His eyes were lonely. He suppressed his anger and sighed, "Now that Handan is dead, you and I should be united." Looking at the sword in the square, the owner of the cottage felt that he was old. A scholar who had become a crown could ride a sword, which was hard to find for ordinary swordsmen. The old man said slowly, Murong Baoding is a man of great talent and bold vision, but he has a disloyal heart. Even if he can fight against Her Majesty, who is from the same clan as him, can he fight against Uoba Bodhisattva who has military power? Can he defeat the other 7 people who will sit on the mountain and watch the tigers fight? If I kneel down and show my goodwill to Dunhuang City, even if the Shen family is struggling at death's door, it is better than being executed one day. Shen Kaihe said coldly, let's talk about the future. Right now, we still have to rely on people. The old owner smiled bitterly and said nothing. In the square, the spring and autumn sword had broken through 2 layers of the circle. More than half of the people were dead or injured. Chapter 530. The sword returned to its scabbard. The purple-clothed Shen Kaihe swept into the arena and fought a thrilling battle with this elegant swordsman. His figure was nimble and his purple sleeves fluttered. It was a very beautiful sight. The battlefield continued to shift. Shen Kaihe was punched in the chest by the hut master Shenji, who was 20 steps behind him. The latter's expression changed slightly. He lifted his walking stick and rushed forward, supporting this eldest son of the hut master. Shen Kaihe stood behind the long-bearded hut master. Su Fengnian originally did not want to play any trick of capturing the leader of the bandits. He only wanted to deal with the continuous battle of attrition and kill again. However, since he had delivered himself to his doorstep, he did not hold back. He unsheathed the spring and autumn sword. He saw the hut master with the white beard lift his walking stick. Su Fengnian sensed that this second-level master's qi had collapsed in an instant. Although there were signs of reversing the flow of qi, it was as if he had received another heavy blow. Finally, like the river and the sea, the spring and autumn sword pierced through his heart without any stagnation. It drew an exquisite arc in the air and returned to its scabbard. Su Fengnian narrowed his eyes. There was some surprise and even more unreasonable strange smile. Shen Kaihe roared, "Father," and hugged the dying old man who had been pierced by the sword. He carefully sat down and lowered his head with tears in his eyes. His gaze was unusually cold. The hut master Shenji, who was about to meet the enemy, had been attacked twice in the back by the qi of the sword at close range. 2 of his vital acupoints had been pierced. The acupoints themselves were not fatal to martial artists. However, the Shen family's unique inner strength cultivation method was very particular about stopping and then stopping again in the circulation of qi. The circulation of qi was progressively progressing layer by layer. In the end, the atmosphere was very vigorous. This subtle moment of the Shen family's 3 stops to reach the peak was not easy for outsiders to grasp. However, Shen Kaihe was very familiar with it. The 2 stabs had caused Shenji's inner strength to lose its foundation. Finally, he was easily defeated by the spring and autumn sword. Father and son, one lying down and one sitting, looked at each other. Unexpectedly, Shen Kaihe, who had committed treason, wanted to use the excuse of wiping the blood to cover Shenji's mouth to prevent him from shouting out the truth. Unexpectedly, the old man only smiled bleakly and did not show much anger. He shook his head slightly and spat out a mouthful of blood. He slowly said, "Kaihe, although Zhongli Handan is arrogant, he has no ambition. You only know how to be jealous of his martial arts talent and hate his ruthlessness. Do you know that your mother and Aunt Lu were killed by your father's hands and not by him? I'm doing this for the future of the cottage. Handan has untied the knot in his heart. He doesn't hate you. Once I die, he will focus on practicing martial arts. You can take advantage of Dunhuang City, which is rumored to be Tuoba's lover, to join the army. Then, you will have a meteoric rise. Furthermore, if Handan reaches the 1st rank, he will be in charge of Lufeng. Then, you will have nothing to worry about. After all, the position of the leader of the cottage is yours. The bright future is also yours. Shenji, who was on the verge of death, spoke intermittently. Shin Kaiha, who was in the prime of his life, pursed his lips and his lips trembled. Shenji, who was like a tiger that did not eat its cubs, grabbed his son's wrist and said with a hoarse voice, Kaiha, don't get involved in the mud of the Murong family. Compared to the huge forces like Dunhuang City, the Shin family can't afford to play with a palace coup. Remember, there is a Zhuwang spy hidden in the cottage. I purposely formed a connection with Dunhuang City to cover up your relationship with Murong Baoding. You have to be careful. Shenji's last words before he died were, don't feel guilty, Kaiha. You are someone who can achieve great things. As your father, I will take it as one of your achievements. In the future, you will bring glory to our family and have more children. Shin Kaiha finally had a few drops of sincere tears. However, there was still no remorse in his eyes. Su Fengnian, who had watched a great show, knew that there was no need to fight today. The purple-robed man's action seemed absurd and cold-blooded. He knew that he could not kill Su Fengnian in a short period of time, but he also revealed the truth of killing his father. It was obvious that he was giving Su Fengnian a name. Not to mention being an enemy, he could even become a secret guest. Su Fengnian suddenly raised his head and glanced over. A silk-robed man jumped gracefully on the roof of a tall building. He flew like a swan goose from a raised eave. After grabbing something, he fell rapidly and disappeared in an instant. Su Fengnian retracted his gaze and asked, what do you mean? Shin Kaiha, who was sitting on the ground, looked as if he was an irreconcilable enemy. He gritted his teeth and said, I, Shin Kaiha, will personally find you after my father's death. Su Fengnian smiled and said, I am Song Rong from the chess and sword music school. Under everyone's gaze, he turned around and left the square. When he went down the mountain, only Han Fang and Zhang Xiuqing were left dumbfounded. The three horses traveled together under the moonlight and passed the towering archway made of Phoebe Jinan wood. Han Fang was frightened. She gathered her courage and asked, Sir, are you from the chess and sword music school? Su Fengnian smiled and said, obviously, it is even more fake than the name Su Lang that I told you. It is just a name I made up casually. Do you really believe it? Zhang Xiuqing smiled knowingly. Su Fengnian looked back at the night view of the mansion with lanterns hanging high and said softly, I know you are from the Han family. If you don't want to die in the revenge of the cottage, bring a few trustworthy brothers and return to Jizhou tonight. Han Fang said bitterly, Sir, who are you? Su Fengnian said irresponsibly, you will know in the future. Anyway, if you still want to help the Han family and turn the Legend of the Courteous Minister written by the historian of the Liang dynasty into Legend of the Loyal Minister, then go to Jizhou. Besides, you have no choice. If you want to live, you can only escape to the south. Han Fang said stubbornly, what if I don't want to listen to orders? Su Fengnian sneered and said, then die. Han Fang's expression was solemn and she said calmly, when have the men of the Han family ever feared death? Su Fengnian smiled and said, of course I am not afraid of death. Back then, in the capital of Ji province, a few hundred members of the Han family were strung together like grasshoppers. When they arrived at the entrance of the city, they raised their hands and chopped down with their knives. I heard that the butchers' knives even left a gash in their heads. I don't know how you became a cowardly fish that escaped the net, but I won't look into it. I will only negotiate with you. You go to Ji province and use the Han family's banner to secretly recruit 1,000 elite soldiers. As for where you hide, it is up to you. If you want gold, I will give you gold. If you want silver, I will give you silver. I can even provide war horses and weapons. After that, let's see if God will let the Han family wash away this injustice. As for who I am. Zhang Xiuqing squeezed the horse's belly and took the lead to run a few hundred steps forward. After the three horses ran side by side again, Zhang Xiuqing saw that Han Fang's face was still in shock. It was obvious that the answer must be very shocking. Su Fengnian asked, other than you, Han Fang, are there any other direct descendants of the Han family? Han Fang shook her head and said, no. Su Fengnian sneered and said, fortunately, otherwise I would have killed them for you. Han Fang was slightly angry but she suppressed it. Zhang Xiuqing's eyes were shining. The reason why he did not abandon Han Fang after the decline of the Zhongyi camp was because he, Zhang Xiuqing, no longer hoped for the day to come. When he interacted with Han Fang, he was more of a friend and confidant. Unknowingly, there was no master-servant relationship between them because Zhang Xiuqing knew that Han Fang controlled people too rigidly. She did not know how to reward and punish. To put it bluntly, she was soft-hearted. She was definitely not a wise ruler who could conquer the world. Zhang Xiuqing did not mind being someone's dog, as long as that person showed enough shrewdness and skill. Su Fengnian put his hands in his sleeves. Thinking of the warmth of the past, the corner of his mouth raised slightly and his eyes were gentle. I can't believe I met you in Juzhou. Chapter 531. Su Fengnian asked Han Fang and Zhang Xiuqing, the two smart people, to go to Zhongyi village to pack their luggage. He went down the mountain alone and came to the wine shop. He saw Qing Junyang lying there sleeping soundly. If she was seen by the skinny monkey, who was as impatient as a monkey, wouldn't he drag her into the depths of the forest or the fields and ride her like a mare? After Su Fengnian sat down, he reached out and patted her cheek, which made her shiver. The woman, who had been through a lot, subconsciously wiped the corner of her mouth, afraid that she would forget herself. Most women were like this. They loved beauty, cherished reputation, were afraid of pain, and were even more afraid of death. Of course, there were exceptions. Su Fengnian had seen too many women who were not inferior to men. He did not dare to underestimate them. Moreover, for women who were more beautiful than 70 yuan, he did not mind if they were older. As long as they were not life and death enemies, he would be kind to them. Qing Junyang was in a daze. She hugged her collar tightly and did not notice anything strange. She was relieved. This expression hurt Su Fengnian. Qing Junyang was experienced and was familiar with the relationship between men and women. She saw the young man's helplessness from the corner of her eye and smiled. Little bastard, you don't even dare to knock on my door. I'll piss you off. Su Fengnian said straightforwardly. Zhongyi village angered the devils of Shinmen's thatched hut. Han Fang and Zhang Xiuqing will take you south to Jizhou to escape. I think the days will be bumpy, but it should be better than being a fish on the chopping block. You will live a more comfortable life there. However, it is up to you whether you want to go to Jizhou or not. I won't force you. I'll tell you in advance that Zhongli Handan of Changle Peak Cottage is dead. You have no one to rely on. Qing Junyang was stunned. She mumbled to herself, dead? Finally dead. Su Fengnian nodded and said, he can't be more dead. I'm not lying to you. Qing Junyang lay on the table and stared blankly. Her breasts were out to scare people again. Was he not afraid of crushing the table? Su Fengnian looked at her openly and asked with a smile, do you know how to ride a horse? Qing Junyang winked and said, I can even make human meat buns. How can I not know how to ride a horse? Su Fengnian's eyes looked strange. He nodded and said, you know how to ride a horse. Qing Junyang's charming eyes were like silk. Under the table, she gently stepped on the foot of the sword-bearing wanderer, and softly said, isn't that so? If you don't believe me. Su Fengnian shook his head. I'm not a casual man. Qing Junyang stopped teasing him. She lowered her eyelids and said softly, I'm a casual woman, right? She did not even question at the end of the sentence. And he? Of course. Of Lady Anne and laughed. Junyang he was that, Bi Qing Junyang did not seem to take it seriously. She said with a worried face, "What can I do in Jizhou?" Su Fingnian stroked the empty wine jar with 2 fingers and said softly, "Continue to be the lady boss of a wine shop. Remember to sell good wine. Don't open a black shop and make human meat buns." The sound of horse hooves was heard. Han Fong and Zhang Xiuqing brought less than 20 riders down the mountain. They got off their horses and came to the table respectfully. Qing Junyang looked at the 2 leaders who were like mice that saw a cat. She was confused. Su Fingnian counted the number of people and laughed, "Including you, there are only 20 riders. Was it the second leader who stopped you? He didn't ask you to drag the whole village down with you." Han Fong blushed. Zhang Xiuqing smiled and hit the nail on the head. If she had not tried her best to stop them and only brought 18 strong brothers to Jizhou, Han Fong would have wanted to bring them all to the south. Su Fingnian stood up slowly and walked around the table to Qing Junyang's side. He picked her up and put her on his horse. He raised his head and said, "Qing Junyang, go to Jizhou. Find a man you like and marry him. If anyone dares to talk bad about you, I will let the 2 leaders tear their mouths apart." On the horse, the young woman who was still drunk suddenly cried. She bent down and hugged the scholar's head, but she did not let go. For a long, long time. Su Fingnian finally said with great difficulty, "I can't breathe." The men of Zhongyi village were stunned. Moreover, Qing Junyang had a moment when she was shy like a young woman. Su Fingnian said softly, "Live well. There is no greater principle in the world than this." She nodded and wiped away her tears. The 21 riders gradually moved away. Su Fingnian waved his hand and touched his head. He said softly, "So fragrant, so heavy." Other than having a funny name, Du Qinglu only had a very ordinary face. His skills were average among the foreign officials of the Shin cottage. He could not participate in confidential matters. 5 or 6 years ago, he went to Changle Peak. Because he practiced a set of sharp swordsmanship that was not known in the Jianghu, the moves were not flashy, but they were very murderous. Thus, he was often caught by Zhongli Handan to compete with him and practice his swordsmanship. Du Qinglu was not a loner. He got along well with many officials on the mountain. He was a small character who was willing to lower himself to get to know people. He was also one of the few important officials in the cottage who was willing to be nice to the bandits. He often went down the mountain to drink and laugh. Chapter 532. This chapter is not updated on the 18th. It is a chapter to thank the new top scholar for his calligraphy. The mansion of Shinmen Cottage was in chaos. As the night deepened, more and more red lanterns were hung. Many of the acquaintances began to gather and whisper to each other. Those who did not have time to get close to the fight were all shocked by it. 34 people died in the encirclement of the young swordsman who went up the mountain to pick a fight. Even the head of the cottage, Shenji, was stabbed in the heart. Because of the rolling sword Qi, Shenji, who had been in the second rank for many years, was careless and died, which did not cause too much speculation. After cleaning up the mess, Shinkaihe in purple went to the back of the mountain and knocked on a wooden door. He told a white-haired old man about the situation at the top of the mountain. The old man did not say a word. In the end, he stared at his grandson's eyes. Shinkaihe sat upright and did not move, especially with a straight back. The old man in Changle Peak was like a retired emperor who retired after abdicating. He finally spoke in a plain tone, "Bury your father early to avoid leaving a topic for gossip." Shinkaihe knelt down and cried bitterly, "I am unfilial." Now that his grandson was no longer observing his expression, the old man slowly showed his weariness, just like a piece of rice paper that had been laid out for many years, but after a drop of thick ink had been dripped into it, he would eat the ink later. He no longer mentioned this matter and asked, "How is that woman from Dunhuang?" Shen Kaihe choked and said, I don't know if she took advantage of the chaos to go down the mountain or to loot a burning house. The old man said in a low voice, you gradually alienated yourself from the governor of Orange State. You can't expose yourself and make him hate you. But I will draw a bottom line for you on behalf of your father. If you dare to cross the line and insist on using the lives of the Shen family as a bargaining chip for your future, since I already have several great-grandsons, Shenji and Zhongli Handan are dead, I don't mind losing one of you. If I can't help you up, why should I help you? Shen Kaihe, who kept his head down, said, I know the severity of the matter. The head of the cottage closed his eyes and concentrated. Shen Kaihe waited for a moment before he got up and bowed to leave. It was destined that the mountain would be covered in mourning clothes at dawn. The mountain wind was bleak. The old man opened his eyes and looked at the door. Since you're passing by, why don't you come in for a chat? The voluptuous woman in embroidered clothes smiled sweetly, pushed open the door, entered, and sat down directly. The old man with a serious expression sized her up and asked, Miss, are you in the embroidered musk deer that entered the rankings with that blind zither player, Shui Song? The woman touched her blood-red lips with her finger and smiled. I'm only at the bottom. It's not worth mentioning. This old man shook his head and said, because there are 2 people in the second place, making a total of 11 people on the list. The first place and the little girl called Jia 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 are just a little more famous, but they don't live up to their names. In this old man's opinion, in terms of killing techniques, Shui Songguan is good at Xian killing Vajra, so he should be ranked first. Miss Jean Musk might not be in the top 3, but at the very least, she should be in the top 5. The beautiful young woman pretended to hold her chest and laughed while covering her heart. Shin Shuehu, everyone in the Orange Prefecture says that you have high standards. How is it that your flattery skills are better than your skills? You really have hidden your strength well. The old man who was being sarcastically laughed it off and changed the topic. He sighed and said, my family's dirty linen is made public. Miss Jean Musk, please don't laugh at me. The woman raised her eyebrows and asked, dirty linen. Is it as ugly as me? The old man laughed and said, Miss Jean Musk, you really like to joke. This old man has lived for more than 80 years, but I've never seen a woman as beautiful as you. She asked seriously, I killed an ignorant cottage employee called Du Qinglu, who was a spy on Murong Baoding's side. Will you punish me? Shen Shuehu thought for a while and shook his head. This old man is not qualified to punish you. Not to mention the second king in Dunhuang City and the small cottage, even you can come and go as you please. However, the imperial edict will definitely be investigated. Can the cottage say that it was Dunhuang City who killed you? Miss Jean Musk, you also know that the cottage is not Dunhuang City. We can't withstand the imperial edict from Murong Baoding. The woman twitched the corner of her mouth and said, okay. Shen Shuehu bowed and said, I'll have to rely on Dunhuang City in the future. She nodded. Su Fingnian came to Mount Liuyi all by himself and left all by himself. He found a pot of wine at Qing Zhunyang's wine shop and carried his bookcase on his back. Wearing a black robe and a white undershirt, he drank as he walked. Su Fingnian felt that he finally had a Motherf * king heroic demeanor. Why did he go up the mountain to kill people? Su Fingnian walked on the muddy road that was full of potholes due to the horse's hooves. He thought for a while. Qing Zhunyang's words were so good. In Su Fingnian's opinion, he took the initiative to jump into the Jianghu. Whether it was dog paddling or backstroke, he could only rely on his own abilities. For example, the Fish Dragon Gang and Lu Narong had to be responsible for their own lives. Other people practiced martial arts and ran to help the weak after reaching a certain level. Su Fingnian was in Beimang and was in a precarious situation. He did not want to join in the fun. Since he was determined to seek fame and fortune in the Jianghu, he could not blame others if he was killed by the waves. Chapter 533. The girl's eyes and brows were full of charm. She only pretended to be delicate and timid, not in a hurry to jump into the scholar's arms. Is this path-cutting bandit the king of the mountain? Wrong, this one is only a small bandit, snatching a girl for the king of the mountain to be his wife. Once this merit is accomplished, I can go from a small bandit to a big bandit. Then haven't you even hugged the bandit's wife? Moreover, this is the wilderness. Even if you do something to this little girl, heaven and earth won't respond. That's true. But if you become the bandit's wife and tell the mountain king, won't my head be chopped off? Humph. Little girl, don't talk nonsense and disturb my mind. Although I'm a nameless nobody right now, I have the ambition to be the king of the mountain. Even if you're a fickle woman and are willing to sleep with me under the canopy of heaven and earth, I will definitely not do it. Bah, you dare to tease me. If my young master hears this, he will chop you to death. Who is your young master? Is he as skilled as me in both sword and saber arts? Moreover, your young master is definitely not as elegant as me. Little bandit, you are just a frog in a well. How would you know my young master's good points? I am not a frog in a well. I am a toad blocking the road. Little girl, you can insult this one's appearance, but don't insult my bandit profession. Sigh, my young master said that he has made up his mind to build a pigsty on the ridge of the field. He will not let the goodies flow into the fields of others. But why haven't you eaten me yet? That's strange. Your young master is indeed a gentleman. I admire him very much. The moon was bright and the wind was high. It was a good night to kill people. Otherwise, it would be a man and a woman having a romantic moment. How bored must this pair be to chat in the middle of the night on a muddy path? After chattering for a while, the embroidered-clothed girl finally flew into Su Fengnian's arms like a graceful butterfly. Su Fengnian hugged her soft body and sniffed hard. He closed his eyes and said with intoxication, after smelling it, your scent is still the most fragrant. It's even better than seeing a piece of delicious roasted sweet potato after you've lost your mind from hunger. The woman hugged him tightly and pressed herself against his chest. It was as if she wanted to rub herself into his body. She murmured, this servant was originally called Sweet Potato. The young man and woman, who were master and servant, walked out of Bailiang at almost the same time. It seemed like a warm reunion in a foreign land, but who would know about the soul-stirring journey that belonged to each of them? She was always smiling at the people she cared about. Sweet Potato, loosen your grip. You're choking me. Young master, you are now an expert, an expert, an expert. Then you should loosen your grip. It's inappropriate to keep hugging her like this. Oh, young master, you have an extra sword. Show it to this servant. If you need to clean the sword, just leave it to this servant. You're asking for a beating. Don't play any tricks. Let go of me. Young master, the last time you returned from your travels, in Wutangan, you said that there was a powerful swordsman who killed a beauty with a single sword. Was it this sword? Can't you have some rules? Su Fengnian didn't know whether to laugh or cry. He slapped her buttocks and used a little force to break free from the beauty's embrace. He glared at her and saw that her face was strangely red, as if she had taken an aphrodisiac. The two of them looked at each other. Su Fengnian pinched her nose and said with a smile, why are you here? What are you doing in Shinmen Cottage? It was Wutangan's first-class servant, Sweet Potato. Her eyes were filled with hidden bitterness. She enunciated each word clearly and said, I missed you, young master. Su Fengnian pretended that he was going to hit her. Sweet Potato leaned over and looked like she was going to let him do whatever he wanted. Su Fengnian frowned. Sweet Potato smiled and whistled. A horse galloped over and she took the reins. She said seriously, I left Bailiang a few days later than you, young master. There was a plot in Dunhuang City by the prince's mansion, which involved the cottage. My original intention was to knock some sense into Shinkaiha, who was secretly close to Murong Baoding, the head of Orange Province. I didn't expect young master to be so powerful that you killed the cottage and even killed Shinji. Coincidentally, I pulled out one of Zhu Yan's spies. After that, I used a trick and told the previous cottage master, Shin Shuehu, that I was Murong Baoding's spy. I promised him that Dunhuang City would be the scapegoat. I bet that he wouldn't dare to take the initiative to mention this to Murong Baoding. During this period of time, I imitated the handwriting of the catcher and delivered some authentic secret letters. I won't be exposed for the time being. At least, when your highness leaves Jinsi province, the butterfly catchers 300 miles away will only notice. If we are lucky, your highness may not have revealed any clues to those people when you return to Beiliang. Su Fingnian mounted the horse and bent down to pull Sweet Potato up. He hugged her slender waist and rested his head on the servant's round shoulder. He frowned and said, "What if it's exposed?" She calmly said, "There's no harm in that. Just let Sweet Potato follow the vine to find the melon, and kill more than a dozen catchers in one go to catch the butterfly lady. This will throw them into confusion, and I guarantee that they won't be able to track down your highness' whereabouts. They'll only be led by the nose by this servant." Su Fingnian was silent. Even the king of Beiliang, Su Shao, praised her for having a clever heart. Sweet Potato said softly, "Young master, Sweet Potato is a death warrior. If I don't die, what am I living for? Isn't it to help master kill people?" Su Fingnian gently bit her earlobe and ordered, "You're not allowed to say that. You're not allowed to do that." Her body trembled and she leaned back. Su Fingnian, who could be said to be calm, asked, "All these years, you've been leaving the prince's mansion every now and then. Have you been running to Beimang's Dunhuang City?" Sweet Potato obediently and meekly acknowledged. There were many servant girls in Wutongan, each with their own merits. They were all outstanding young women. Not to mention Spear Fairy Wang Xiu's daughter, Blue Bird, Green Ant was a small national champion on the chess scale. She only lost to her second sister, Su Weisheng. Su Fingnian had been defeated by him for many years. He was good at the quatrains and had a strong poetic style. The maidservant, who had been renamed Cucumber, had outstanding attainments in music. She was also an expert in cooking, and the pastries she made were comparable to those made by the chefs in the imperial palace. Only the northern Liang prince's mansion was wealthy enough to allow so many women to gather in one courtyard. Any one of them would be able to make the scholars of northern Liang go crazy. Sweet Potato was undoubtedly the most interesting one. Blue Bird, who was also a servant girl, had a cold temperament and was difficult to get close to. Sweet Potato was much more gentle and charming. Everyone liked her from the bottom of their hearts. She always looked at the big picture and grasped people's hearts. The harmony in the courtyard could not go unnoticed. Su Shao said that she could go to the palace and become an invincible concubine. It was not an exaggeration. Her charm was on her face, but she was cold to the bone. Su Fingnian had been close to her since they were young. They were probably both cold people. That was why they were so close. They were like hamsters in the winter. They could only snuggle up to each other for warmth. Su Fingnian curiously asked, "According to what you said, you have another identity in Dunhuang?" Sweet Potato put her hands on her waist and nodded, "Of course there will be. Dunhuang City has many different forces entangled with each other. It's very complicated." This servant entered early. At that time, Dunhuang City was short of manpower and was in turmoil. I took advantage of the situation. I know that there are no less than 8 big mountains. Among them, there are 3 factions that have been accumulated by the people of Dunhuang for 2 generations. They are like 3 legs of a tripod. It can be said that they spared no effort in scheming against each other. Young master also knows that the northern barbarians are learning our dynasty's battle of wits. It is a bit nonsensical, but there are some battles of bravery that are very interesting. Other than the two factions supported by Murong Baoding and Jinxi province, the Buke Tai, which is ranked 9th among the top 10 sects in Beimang, has its foundation in Dunhuang. It is one of the city's elders. It does not participate in the struggle and has never done anything like pulling chestnuts out of the fire. The other two factions are the powers formed by the entanglement of wealthy merchants. They are particularly slippery in their conduct and cannot be underestimated. Su Fengnian sighed with emotion. They really have a lot of methods, he said. Sweet Potato leaned against his chest and closed her bewitching limpid eyes. She said in a low voice, recently, I heard that there was a disciple of Chao Guanzi on the prairie who defeated Tuoba Chunsen's arrogance. I knew it was young master. Su Fengnian stroked her fine black hair and said with a laugh, you and I are like frogs meeting frogs in boiling oil. We are brothers in distress. Sweet Potato said in a sweet voice, I am a woman. Chapter 534. Su Fengnian did not respond. Thinking about the Zhongyi camp, he was touched. He smiled and said, I've been staying at Mount Liuyi these past few days. I met a descendant of the Han family and encouraged him to go to Jizhou. Sweet Potato, if you have time, send a message back to Beiliang and ask my master to play Go. He's good at this. Sweet Potato nodded. Okay. When we get to Dunhuang, we'll do this. I guarantee that there won't be any mistakes. Su Fengnian said softly, my master has always regarded Go as a wild fox. He disapproves of it and doesn't think highly of it. He says that although the moves of the Go pieces seem complicated, it's far from being as unpredictable as the human heart. A Go piece can take root on the chessboard mountain. After all, a black Go piece is still a black Go piece, and a white Go piece is still white Go piece. No matter how you change the colors, a person can reverse black and white. Loyalty, righteousness, kindness, and so on are not worth mentioning. In the past, I didn't think so. I just thought that my master's Go skills were not good enough. He couldn't even beat my second sister, so he found this excuse. Now that I look back, I understand my master's good intentions. In the past, under the shade of the tree in the prince's mansion, watching the small ripples or the rise and fall of the water was always like watching a play. I never personally entered the game. Perhaps it's because the old foxes hide too deeply that I can't see it clearly. But in Mount Liuyi, a small Zhongyi camp, there are some differences in the way the leaders do things. Sweet Potato, is this what my master meant by cutting a small hole to make a big fuss? Sweet Potato stroked the back of Su Fengnian's interlocked fingers and said softly with a smile, young master is becoming more and more sensible. Su Fengnian was about to teach his head made a lesson when she suddenly turned her head. She raised her sharp chin. Her fox-like face was devoid of any signs of spring. She said, young master, I'm not talking about Sweet Potato. I'm talking about those people who can't see the light for years or even decades. They don't even have a proper name when they die. You have to remember their kindness. Su Fengnian nodded. I'll remember that. The transmission of information was done in the form of human lives and blood. On the battlefield were scouts and horses, in the dark were secret agents and spies. The latter was even more silent. Sweet Potato, this horse is not bad. Is it a famous horse from Beimang? It's a night jade lion. One horse is worth 50 taels of gold. You rode from Dunhuang. What kind of status does he have to be so imposing? Young master, you'll know when you arrive. You don't want to say. I scratched your armpit. Young master, don't. You're rebelling. Just because you say you don't want it, you don't want it. Who's the young master and who's the servant girl? Instead of finding a place to rest, they galloped through the night and arrived at a small city without walls in the wee hours of the morning. Sweet Potato, who had slept in Su Fengnian's arms, continued to curl up her head, not letting anyone see her beautiful face. He stopped at an inn to rest, paid the bill, and left in less than 2 hours. The innkeeper and the waiter, who were mesmerized by the sweet potato face and figure, looked at the departing figure, thumped their chests and stamped their feet. This damned scholar, he picked such a delicate and beautiful flower. The innkeeper and his assistant suddenly came back to their senses. The latter took the lead and was about to run to the inn where the man and woman were staying. What could they do in 2 hours if they came and went in a hurry? As long as one was enlightened, they would know even if they used their buttocks to think. Smelling the fragrance of the quilt was also a great blessing. The innkeeper grabbed his assistant's collar and angrily scolded him, driving him to do his work. He rushed into the room and saw that the quilt was neat and clean. He did not give up his evil intentions and jumped on the big bed. Not smelling the woman's body fragrance, the middle-aged bald innkeeper became absent-minded again. He punched the bed and cursed bitterly, "This boy is not a man. Such a beautiful woman, it's worth it even if I lose 10 years of my life to have fun with her." It was said that a horse could travel 1,000 miles in a day. It was impossible for a single horse to travel 1,000 miles in a day. A military horse had to brush its nose every 30 miles. Moreover, even if the horse did not hesitate to run until it died, it would not be possible unless it was the continuous post horses of the Liang dynasty. If there was an emergency military situation, it would need to travel 800 miles. It was based on the premise that it was changed every few dozen miles. Only then could it reach the limit of 800 miles in a day. During the Great War of the Spring and Autumn period, there was a rare example of a horse traveling 900 miles in a day to deliver a letter. However, during that widespread delivery, more than 10 post stations were neglected and 2 priceless horses died from running. This jade lion with good endurance and leg strength did not rush, but it did not stop. It took 3 days and 3 nights to see the huge outline of Dunhuang City. It was just dawn and Dunhuang City was strictly forbidden at night. At this time, the city had not yet opened. Sweet Potato asked if they wanted to take a look at the Tsaiji Buddha cave outside Dunhuang City. There were more than 26,000 statues of Buddha, Bodhisattva, celestial beings, and fairies in Tsaiji Buddha cave. It was worthy of being called a sacred place of Buddhism, second only to the 2 Zen temples in the Central Plains and Mount Lontua in the western region. Unlike many important places of religion, Tsaiji Buddha cave was not built on a mountain. It did not ask for the mountain to be higher than the Buddha. It was built from the ground or carved from the mountain. It allowed visitors and believers to go to the top of Tsaiji Mountain to enjoy the scenery. The only main Buddha was only carved from the mountain. There was no need to go up the mountain. The main Buddha of Tsaiji cave was 3 Buddhas of 3 worlds sitting on the Sumera platform. The one in the middle was 66 feet tall. His face was plump and solemn. The pattern of his cassock hung diagonally in front of him. The 2 sides were more than 40 feet tall. There were bodhisattvas on each side. At the end of the 2 sides were 8 celestial beings. Seeing the towering Buddha statue from afar, Sweet Potato smiled and said, "Behind the main Buddha, there are 81 lotuses. On each lotus, there is a bodhisattva worshipping it. There are many Buddhists in Beimang. These 81 bodhisattvas have almost all been divided among the rich and powerful. Their incense is flourishing. I'm afraid even the 2 Zen temples can't compare. Among them, there are more than 10 great bodhisattvas. Not to mention the rich and powerful in Dunhuang, even the few great city in the grassland would have to think twice before voluntarily giving up the idea of fighting for them." Su Fengnian dismissed it with a smile and raised his head to take a closer look. The main Buddha performed the fearless mudra. On the top of the cavern, there was a large lotus with shallow marks carved by the southern Tang round knife. It left a deep impression on Su Fengnian. Hundreds more flew into the sky. Their bodies were light and their expressions were natural. Su Fengnian lowered his head and put his palms together. Beimeng and Liang were about to launch a mighty Buddha extermination if nothing unexpected happened. Su Fengnian continued to worship Buddha. Sweet Potato did not believe in Buddha, but she followed suit. After standing still for a long time, Su Fengnian did not say anything. He turned around and left. He pulled on the reins but did not mount the horse. He said softly, "Zizai, zizai, zizai, there is no one, there is no me. Ask your own safety at this time, know where you are and you are naturally at ease. Buddha Tathagata, there is a future, there is a future. Find out how this life came to be, come to see Tathagata." Sweet Potato smiled tenderly and said, "Young master, this couplet is very appropriate for the occasion." Su Fengnian turned his head and smiled. He sighed and said, "Isn't that so?" Remembering something, Su Fengnian said, "I met a monk this time. You won't be able to guess who he is." Sweet Potato said, "The Dragon Tree Monk, the abbot of the 2 Zen temples. I know he has come to Beimeng. Since young master said so, it must be him. This Buddhist saint is indeed extraordinary. Otherwise, why would he be praised for crossing all living beings in the sea of bitterness? Only the Kunlun Pawn dragon knows how to listen to his lectures. The Buddhist lion's roar can cause the Penglai Sea to raise huge waves." Su Fengnian looked melancholy. She covered her mouth and smiled. She took a few steps back and pointed to the top of the mountain. She said softly, "I just got the news that the Empress wants to invite the state preceptor, Immortal Qilin, to build a Taoist temple on Saiji Mountain." Su Fengnian said to himself, "Do the Buddhists and Taoists hate each other in the mountains?" Su Fengnian left Saiji Myriad Buddha Cave far away. He got on the horse with her and galloped to Dunhuang City. Sweet Potato asked, "Young master, the 6 paths of reincarnation mentioned by the Buddhists, is there really such a thing?" Su Fengnian said calmly, "If you believe it, there is. If you don't believe it, there is none." She hesitated for a moment and looked back. She was destined to die when she was born. She always wanted to give her body to young master so that she could die willingly. If she died early and reincarnated, she would seize the opportunity to be a devout Buddhist in this life and reincarnate as a good-looking woman. Maybe she could meet him again. She didn't want to live until she was old and wrinkled. It was too ugly. Su Fengnian suddenly said, "Sweet Potato, when I have a daughter in the future, no matter who she is, you will help her dress up and teach her how to apply rouge, okay?" She blinked her eyes and asked with a red face, "But I'm just a worthless maid." Su Fengnian said in a deep voice, "I'm a man and you're a woman. It's that simple. If you talk about worthless again, I'll beat you." Sweet Potato lowered her head and then looked up at him in a daze. Outside the city, young master and maid were enjoying each other. He continued, "You have to promise me that I'll bully you when I get to the city. Don't talk about beating you, I'll eat you up." "Really?" "A gentleman keeps his word. Young master is a gentleman. A humble person's words can't be changed even by 9 bulls and 2 tigers. Young master is heroic." "That's right, let's go. Pick a big bed and go to bed." Chapter 535. The yellow sand stretched for thousands of miles. Dunhuang had formed a circle, creating a paradise for 70 to 80,000 people. The snow-white night jade lion did not go through the south gate, but instead went to the north gate. Su Fengnian knew that according to the layout of Dunhuang, going through the north gate was like going through the black tortoise into the imperial palace. However, Sweet Potato was meticulous and had taken root in Dunhuang for many years. Su Fengnian was happy to go along with the host and did not say much. As they approached the north gate, Sweet Potato dismounted and said that he would lead the horse into the city. Su Fengnian did not agree and dismounted together to walk. Sweet Potato insisted on taking the bookcase and carrying it on his back. One on the left and one on the right, they walked towards the north gate. There were 2 rows of strong armored guards with halberds in their hands. They were all ceremonial embroidered halberds. Seeing Sweet Potato in embroidered robes, they knelt down without saying a word. There were more than 100 people kneeling down. Su Fengnian was confused. After passing through the gate, his vision suddenly opened up. Just as the Tide Listening Pavilion had described, the giant palace at the northern end of Dunhuang had been split into 2 for some reason in recent years. Its geographical location was very clear. It was divided into 2 palaces, east and west. The Yeting Palace in the east and the Purple Golden Palace in the west. Su Fengnian followed Sweet Potato and led the horse westward. The ground beneath his feet was paved with thick white jade slices made of fine suet jade. In front of a heavy palace door that was slowly opening, Su Fengnian deliberately squatted down to touch it. Behind the vermilion door, the pretty palace maids in wide-sleeved red and green gowns widened their eyes when they saw this scene. They seemed to be surprised that this young foreigner was so tacky and unworldly. Su Fengnian got up and could not help but ask softly, "Are you the Castellan's confidant or a small leader in the Purple Golden Palace?" Sweet Potato answered with a straight face, "Both." Su Fengnian did not say anything else. Dunhuang's power was complicated. These soldiers and palace maids were not very clean. The more they spoke, the more likely they would make mistakes. Passing through corridors and aisles, Sweet Potato gave the Night Jade Lion to the palace maids to send to the stables. Next, they arrived at the inner court palace. They stopped at a plaque hanging from Qing Li Zhai. Sweet Potato pushed the door open and chuckled, "Young master, are you not afraid that I will betray you and bring you into Dunhuang?" Su Fengnian dismissed it with a smile and walked into the room. He was stunned for a moment. It was actually the same layout as the Wudong Garden of the Northern Liang Prince's mansion. There was a sense of familiarity with the elegant furnishings, porcelain bottles, incense burners, and the 4 treasures on the desk. Su Fengnian reached out to touch a large pouch filled with crystal balls and white chrysanthemums. His fingers then touched the large red sandalwood table with carved dragons. Sweet Potato seemed to have a great sense of accomplishment and satisfaction. She looked at Su Fengnian's side profile and whispered in a sweet voice, "Young master has returned home." Seeing her young master's puzzled face, Sweet Potato no longer kept Su Fengnian in suspense. She put down the bookcase and pulled Su Fengnian to the couch by the window to lie down. She spoke tirelessly, "The lord of the city is this servant's aunt." She sat on this position with the secret support of Beiliang Palace. This servant was originally sent to Wudong Garden with a status similar to that of a hostage. However, Wang Fei treated me like her own daughter and taught me martial arts. On the other hand, this servant was not very close to aunt. And also had a hard life. She was originally a concubine of the Beimang Palace and was framed by Empress Murongshi. That was why she lost the battle for favor and lost the position of empress. However, the late Yellow Emperor had a secret posthumous edict that forbade Murongshi, who was the empress at that time, from killing aunt. He also asked aunt to ensure her safety for the rest of her life. Aunt's family declined and she only brought this servant with her to become homeless. Although her life was not in danger, she had experienced many hardships. At that time, there were many rumors and slanders, which were not all nonsense. Later on, when she met the great general and Wang Fei at the border, her luck changed. In addition, when Tuobo was young, he did receive aunt's favor. After he became the king of the northern courtyard who was in charge of half the country's military, he had a lot of protection for Dunhuang City. There were some things that went beyond the rules in the city, and the Beimang Palace had no choice but to turn a blind eye to it. Sweet Potato sat cross-legged with Su Fengnian resting his head on her lap. She untied the hairband that tied his hair and combed his hair. Su Fengnian closed his eyes and asked, "Your aunt?" Sweet Potato said calmly, "A few years ago, the great demon Luo Yang passed by Dunhuang City. Ant fought with him and died after a year. At that time, Luo Yang was going to enter the city and massacre the city. Ant divided the giant Immortal Palace and gave the Yetting Palace to this demon as his temporary residence. She racked her brains to invite a peerless Buddha for Dunhuang City. Dunhuang City benefited from the disaster. Even the Beimang Empress stopped many of her infiltrations and even withdrew Zhu Yan's forces. Although Luo Yang was the Yetting Palace master in name, he did not show up in these years. After Ant died, her funeral was kept a secret and I became the palace master of the Purple Gold Palace. Ant left behind her last words. When Luo Yang moved into the Yetting Palace, it meant that she had a backer. Only then did I ascend the throne and announce her death." Su Fengnian frowned. During the trip to Beimang, the famous demon Luo Yang's reputation was like thunder to his ears. Su Fengnian opened his eyes and asked, "Who is this Luo Yang?" Sweet Potato shook his head and said, "No matter how the various powers of Northern Mang investigated, they couldn't find any traces of him. I heard from my aunt that this young man has the appearance of a woman. However, although his brows and eyes are somewhat charming, he has a valiant temperament. He's even better than the young Tuoba Bodhisattva. He likes to wear white clothes and doesn't use weapons." However, there was a rumor that several stunning women had appeared around Luo Yang and were treated as his exclusive property. Among them, there was no lack of daughters of noble families. At that time, Dunhuang City had also sent a young beauty whose beauty could topple a city. Luo Yang's fishing habits should be true. Su Fengnian held Sweet Potato's hand that was caressing his cheek and subconsciously rubbed it. He asked, "Will this Luo Yang have evil thoughts when he sees you?" Sweet Potato smiled and said, "This servant's beauty is probably not enough to enter his eyes." Su Fengnian scolded, "T." Sweet Potato lowered her head and stared into his red phoenix eyes. Her breath smelled like orchids as she whispered, "Young master, after 3 years of traveling, I heard you tell me that only those who eat too much sweet potato will fart. You haven't even eaten a sweet potato yet." Su Fengnian's eyes suddenly widened. Sweet Potato's unruly hand touched his waist and went straight to the root of the problem. He looked into her beautiful face. Her eyes were like silk, and her eyebrows were full of lust. However, the bottom of her eyes could not hide the shyness of a young woman. Su Fengnian did not know whether to laugh or cry. "How much courage do you have to do such a thing? Playing little tricks with a womanizer like me, in the end you are the one who is at a disadvantage." Su Fengnian was not embarrassed by his little brother's uncontrollable hostility. On the other hand, Sweet Potato, who had secretly looked at a few erotic pictures with Green Ant and the others, did not know how to end it. Being stared at by Su Fengnian, Sweet Potato blushed and did not know what to do. Su Fengnian saw that her eyes and cheeks were almost dripping with tears. He did not want to embarrass her any further. He smiled and said, "Stop fooling around. I'm going to take a bath first and then have a good sleep. I won't be taking care of the sword today. I'll have a good rest. When I wake up naturally, we can talk about other things." Sweet Potato felt as if she had been pardoned. When she bent down to put on her embroidered shoes, Su Fengnian slapped her especially plump and bouncy buttocks. He teased, "You don't know, but on this trip to Beimang, I was constantly being teased by women. I even slapped a woman's buttocks in a border town. But she wasn't as pretty as you. Her face was 10 streets away from yours. Only her breasts could be compared to yours, but her buttocks were far from yours." Sweet Potato, who had evil intentions but no guts, fled in panic. Half an hour later, Sweet Potato led Su Fengnian to a side room. There was a bathtub made of yellow rosewood that was filled with mist. It was steaming hot. Even though there were no petals, the fragrance of the bathtub assailed his nostrils. Su Fengnian glanced at Sweet Potato, who had taken off her brocade gown and was only wearing undergarments. This was the gift of this first-class maidservant of Wudong Garden. Every early spring, her fragrance could even attract bees and butterflies. The scene of a woman walking with butterflies fluttering around her was too wonderful for words. The scholar officials were addicted to precious jade figurines and the like, but compared to her national beauty and heavenly fragrance, they were not even worth mentioning. Sweet Potato helped him take off his clothes. She was familiar with these chores and was the only personal maidservant in Bailiang Palace. She was only one step away from becoming a Tongfang. Thus, she was also the first person to see Su Fengnian naked. Only when she was not around would the green ants do it for her. Every time, the latter would want nothing more than to close her eyes in embarrassment. Su Fengnian looked at Sweet Potato, who seemed to be possessed by green ants. He smiled and asked, "You were different in the past. Is it because you're so close to home? What, you only know how to be shy now?" Chapter 536. Su Fengnian walked into the bathtub, and Sweet Potato skillfully wiped his body. It was a long time since he felt so comfortable. Sweet Potato saw a scar on his waist that hadn't faded even after the great yellow courtyard. It was a ghastly sight, and her lips trembled. Su Fengnian, who was enjoying himself with his eyes closed, said calmly, "I was unlucky. Tuoba Chunsun brought two great devils to surround me. After I escaped, I was struck by Duanbua Erwi's thunder spear while I was hunting." Sweet Potato remained silent. Her body was pressed against the wooden wall of the bathtub, and her head rested on Su Fengnian's shoulder. She asked softly, "It's not good to stand outside the tub. Do you want me to come in?" Su Fengnian nodded. She didn't take off her thin clothes. She half squatted in the spacious bathtub, and her technique was delicate. Her clothes were soaked, and it didn't make much difference whether she wore them or not. At this moment, it seemed that wearing more clothes would make her even more charming. When Sweet Potato swam behind him like a plump koi and touched the large patch of fine scars on his back, Su Fengnian laughed softly. "Not long ago, I fought with the devil Shui Songwan and broke two of her zither strings. She had the 18 beats of the Hujia, which made me suffer a lot. Now that I think about it, I still have lingering fears. Sure enough, when I see those rare finger Xian experts, I still have to take a detour. At first, I thought that since she jumped into the finger Xian realm, her combat power should be about the same as Duanbua Erwi's. I thought that she could try to fight with them, but I was wrong. In terms of the three sects, there seemed to be no difference between the three realms. However, in Jianghu, the difference of one realm still made a world of difference. Sweet Potato, what realm are you in?" Sweet Potato rubbed Su Fengnian's chest. Her eyes were blurred, her body trembled, and her voice trembled. "I'm both a fake Vajra and a fake finger Xian. It's enough to kill ordinary people." Su Fengnian smelled the natural fragrance of dragon saliva and ancient sandalwood. He said, "It's about time." Sweet Potato nodded and took the lead to get up and leave the bathtub. She carefully wiped her hands with a silk cloth, and then she picked up a pile of clean clothes. On top of it was a purple robe of exquisite craftsmanship. It was the purple robe of the imperial family of the Central Plains. Su Fengnian walked out of the bathtub and walked closer to take a closer look. He said in surprise, "Is this the python robe of the Southern Tang Imperial Weaving Bureau? How did it came to Dunhuang City?" Sweet Potato smiled and said, "When the scholars of the Central Plains fled to the north, one of the leaders of the Weaving Bureau secretly hid this python robe and sold it for profit to an influential official in Dunhuang. The latter gave it to my aunt as a gift. In fact, there were two robes. The robe in my hand was originally intended to be given to a prince by the king of Southern Tang, so it fits you perfectly. The other robe is a yellow robe that is relatively small and delicate. It's more suitable for me to wear, but it's too tight for you to wear. Try it on." Su Fengnian didn't refuse either. In northern Mang, forget about wearing a fallen nation's python robe. Even if he were to wear the Zhao family's Son of Heaven's dragon robe in private, no one would be so bored as to impeach him. Under Sweet Potato's service, he put on the purple robe of the imperial family of the southern Tang and put on the purple gold crown. There were 2 brocade ribbons on both sides of the crown that hung down to his arms. Standing in front of a large bronze mirror with a red sandalwood frame, Sweet Potato's eyes were intoxicated. She said in a daze, "It's a pity young master didn't become an emperor." Su Fengnian laughed. "You've tried it. You still have to sleep. Don't waste this robe. You should change your clothes too." After taking off the robe, Su Fengnian went to his room and fell asleep. Sweet Potato walked over and sat on the bed. She listened to the soft snoring and felt sad. Before traveling, he had never snored. How tired must he be to be like this? Laying down on her side, Sweet Potato gazed at the serene face that was just inches away from her. She whispered, "Gongzi, you're mine now. You're mine alone. I'm not greedy. Even if it's just for one day, it's fine." Day and night in Dunhuang were like 2 seasons. The day was as hot as the summer, and the night was as cold as the late autumn. When Su Fengnian woke up, he was the only one in the room. He put on his boots and felt a little hungry. He went to the desk and picked up a bell and shook it a few times. A palace maid came over slowly. Su Fengnian ordered in the language of the southern Tang, "Bring me a few pieces of sweet potatoes." The palace maid seemed to understand, but she also seemed to not understand. She did not dare to ask too much. She just thought that she had met a strange guest. She went to get a plate and brought back a few pieces of sweet potatoes. Su Fengnian waved his hand to signal her to leave. He then carried a pile of books to the outside of the courtyard. He first lit the freshly cut branches and dug a small hole. Only then did he start to roast the sweet potatoes. The new branches were wet and were not suitable for roasting. This was what old Huang had taught him in the past. Su Fengnian sat on a small embroidered stool and nibbled on a red heart sweet potato. He turned his head and saw the woman who was about to cry. She could be considered the Empress of Dunhuang. He heard her sobbing, "Young master, is this what you meant by eating sweet potatoes? You didn't keep your word." Su Fengnian opened his mouth wide. He was speechless. Sweet Potato had obviously dressed up. She was charming. Now that she was weeping, she was even more attractive. Su Fengnian said helplessly, "What's the rush?" It said that only when one is full and warm can one have the strength to think about one's desires. "Can't I eat sweet potatoes before eating them?" "You're too unreasonable." Sweet Potato smiled through her tears. Su Fengnian carried a few pieces of sweet potatoes into the room and handed one to her. Sweet Potato shook her head. Su Fengnian said softly as he ate, "When I was traveling, every time I ate a roasted sweet potato, I would think that when I got home, I would definitely change your name. Red musk, etc. How could it be more pleasing than sweet potatoes? Holding it to warm your hands, eating it to warm your stomach, and thinking about how it can also warm your heart, right?" Sweet Potato's face was red. A woman dressed up for her bosom friend. Previously, she had spent a lot of time putting on makeup, but it was worth it. A woman undressed for her bosom friend. Previously, when she wore beautiful and complicated clothes, she also liked it. Perhaps it was because they were too close and had been together for too long, but when Sweet Potato's clothes were taken off, Su Fengnian realized how good she was. It was beyond his imagination. Beneath him was a piece of mutton fat jade that emitted a sweet fragrance. A gentleman's virtue was like jade, and a woman's body was like jade. His fingers touched every inch of her body. Her body was sensitive and trembled incessantly. Like a fish in a pond caught in the crossfire, the pair of large twin peaks shook stubbornly. When he went down, it was muddy. Sweet Potato held her face with both hands, not daring to look at others. She also tried to suppress the soft moans that overflowed from her throat and mouth. Su Fengnian leaned over and bit her earlobe, whispering, "Do you want to end the bitterness and enjoy the sweetness?" Sweet Potato pulled his head down and squeezed it between her breasts. Every moment of the night was worth 1,000 gold. It was a pleasure between a man and a woman. However, for a woman, the first time was usually painful and unbearable. There was no physical pleasure to speak of. As for those who became more courageous the night they had their first taste, in Su Fengnian's opinion, they were either heroines or heroines. It was almost impossible. However, Sweet Potato, whose limbs were as taut as bowstrings, seemed to be at the peak of pleasure. The psychological pleasure clearly far overshadowed the pain. She no longer hid and stared hard at Su Fengnian, who was working on top of her. Her face was as red as a peach. Her legs and hands were wrapped around his slender body. Her fine black hair was scattered on the pillow, which set off her white and plump body. When Su Fengnian lay motionless on top of her, she licked his face with her nimble little tongue and asked provocatively, "Young master, are you okay? Don't ask such a question. Young master, whip this servant to your heart's content. Don't take pity on me. I'll definitely fulfill your wish." Every moment was worth 1,000 gold. By now, he had probably spent a few thousand gold. After the second time, he didn't feel tired. The woman under him was dripping with fragrant sweat, but there was still no sign of begging for mercy. Gradually, they were getting better. "Young master, this is the third time. This servant is really going to die. Now you know what it means to be in a state of ecstasy, hovering between life and death. Come on, turn over." The woman was weeping and complaining, her charming eyes like silk. "Young master, this position is embarrassing." There were no more words, only the sound of panting. Su Fengnian was like an old ox diligently plowing the fields. Finally, he couldn't take it anymore and made a gesture of turning over and dismounting. The two sides looked at each other. Su Fengnian saw the messy finger marks on her chest. He held a plump bamboo shoot that was upside down in front of her chest and asked somewhat guiltily, "Does it hurt?" Sweet Potato asked in return, "Is young master tired?" Su Fengnian didn't puff himself up at his own cost. His 5 fingers slightly tightened and he exhaled a long breath. "Do you really think I'm invincible?" Sweet Potato murmured. Her head tilted back slightly and she stuck a finger into her mouth. Su Fengnian laughed and scolded, "You finally know what a disaster is." She suddenly sat up and put on her clothes. She said, "Young master, wait a moment." Su Fengnian didn't know what was going on. He could only turn around and lie down on his side. He watched as she opened a secret room, walked in, and came out a moment later. Su Fengnian was dumbfounded. She put on a golden dragon robe. Under the golden robe was a scene of emptiness. Sweet Potato didn't walk to the big bed. Instead, she walked to the small couch by the window. She put her hands on the couch and bent over to turn her head. Then, she lifted her robe with one hand and smiled charmingly at young master. Su Fengnian muttered to himself, "Let me just die." Chapter 537. Sweet Potato recalled for a moment and said slowly, "Generally speaking, the famous devils of Northern Mang like to travel alone, and they won't take the initiative to fall out with the forces of the imperial court. Generally speaking, they will mind their own business. Plus, the laws of Northern Mang are relatively lax, so there are very few cases of head-on confrontations. The reason why that devil fought with his life on the line wasn't because he was stubborn, but because Andy had personally brought along a few martial arts experts to prevent him from escaping. Dunhuang City has 80,000 to 90,000 people. The soldiers guarding the city are called the Jinwu Cavalry. They are all light cavalry, armed with short knives and light crossbows. They are not careless in night battles and street battles. Half of them are outside the giant immortal palace, and the other half are outside the city. Among them, there are 40 to 50 people who came from Jianghu. They are good at martial arts. They committed crimes outside and had no choice but to seek refuge in Dunhuang City. And also treated them with courtesy. Those who performed meritorious deeds were even rewarded with some older palace maids. It was not that they could not arrange more crossbowmen, but they were limited by the range. 100 people were enough. The remaining 900 cavalrymen were stationed at both ends of the street. 3 cavalrymen were side by side. In one round of charge, 20 cavalrymen were sent out from the east and west, led by a military officer with good martial arts. After the cavalrymen died in battle, waves of arrows were shot down from the roofs, not giving the demon a chance to breathe. The next batch of cavalrymen would stop firing their crossbows and recover their arm strength. There is a very important point. In addition to the 500 Jin Wu cavalry of the giant immortal palace, there are more than 30 Jin Wu soldiers. They are specifically targeted at the Wuling people who committed crimes in Dunhuang City. These people are not good at cavalry fighting, so ants secretly scattered them into the assault team. Each time, there are 2 or 3 people, waiting for an opportunity to assassinate. There is also a group of them on the roofs. They are allowed to retreat. In this way, in the 6th cavalry charge, the demon died of exhaustion and was trampled into a pile of mud by the horse's hooves. Su Fengnian nodded and said, "This is very similar to the time when our Beiliang army fought against the sword emperor of Shishu who guarded the country's gate with only one sword. It was a 2-pronged attack by the cavalry and the men of sacrifice, alternating between light and dark. In addition, the imperial uncle was also determined to die. That was why the entire Jianghu was bitterly disappointed. Last time, Shenmen Cottage was short of a rank 1 master and their cooperation was not good enough. There were too few archers and they could not cause any substantial damage. Otherwise, I would not have been able to leave the mountain so easily. I'm very curious as to how the 9 swords of the Wu family defeated the Beimang's 10,000 cavalry 200 years ago. Are there any secret records in Dunhuang?" Sweet Potato smiled and said, "Auntie is a martial arts fanatic. Aside from her collection of weapons, she also has a few obscure secret manuals. She also likes to comment on the martial artists of the world. She writes them all down on paper, but I'm not really interested in them. I'll bring them out for you later." Su Fengnian joked, "Don't worry, I won't be leaving Dunhuang for a while. I want to see how a city operates, so there's no need to hide this matter." Sweet Potato hugged Su Fengnian's arm. That lump of weight was really shocking. She smiled and said, "I wouldn't dare to fool you." Su Fengnian sighed and said, "This place is really like the Imperial Palace. I wonder what the biggest palace in the world looks like. If I had known, I would have asked Xiao Zhangqing, who had entered the royal capital on his 4th attempt." Sweet Potato smiled and said, "There are palace maids and eunuchs here, but there aren't many, only a few hundred. It can't be compared to the Imperial Palace of Great Peace City. Great Peace City has a human cat Han Diaoxi who fought to the death with Xiao Chongqing 3 times. He's really a weirdo among eunuchs. In my giant immortal palace, the eunuchs are all useless, but the palace maids are all good-looking. Auntie used to be sisters with a secret concubine sect leader from the 4th of the 5 big sects, Princess Tomb. This sect is the biggest demonic sect in Beimang. They have a lot of women and are very good at bewitching men. They take yang to nourish yin, and the women they train are all peerless. Giant Immortal Palace's Dunhuang Flying Immortal Dance was born from Princess Tomb. Would you like to see it? I've only heard of countless men going crazy after seeing it, but I've never heard of anyone who could make an old monk into a bodhisattva. That's why there's a saying about the dance of longevity. It means that whoever can be as unmoving as a mountain can be considered to have achieved longevity. Unfortunately, compared to Princess Tomb's dance of longevity, the Dunhuang flying immortal dance only has 30 to 40% of its essence. Su Fengnian said straightforwardly, it'll be a waste if I don't see it. Even if there's no way to achieve longevity, it'll be good for the eyes. Sweet Potato smiled sweetly, and there wasn't any bitterness or coldness in the depths of her eyes. This was her cleverness and intelligence. Su Fengnian hugged her waist and leaped onto the high wall. They skimmed all the way until they chose the roof of a majestic palace on the central axis of Dunhuang City and lay down. Beside them was the corner of the eaves. After letting go, they looked up at the bright moon above their heads. Su Fengnian pointed and said softly, when I was young, I asked people if there were immortals living on the moon. I asked everyone around me, and the answers were different. My mother said there were. As long as one ascended, they could live in the sky. Su Xiao wasn't serious. He also said there were. He even said that if it rained, it was the immortals' piss. Thunder was fart, and hail was excrement. At that time, whenever it rained, I didn't dare to go out. Second sister was the same as Master Li Shan. They didn't believe in ghosts and gods, so they both said there were no immortals. Eldest sister liked to argue with second sister, but she insisted that there were immortals. One time during the Mid-Autumn Festival, she was angry with second sister. She hugged me and said that when she died, she would definitely watch me from the moon with her mother. She even deliberately said to second sister that she didn't believe in immortals and that she wouldn't be able to see her two younger brothers if she died. Second sister was so angry that she almost hit her. To be honest, I didn't understand why my two sisters always quarreled. At that time, I didn't know anything and liked to fan the flames. I was happy to see them glare at each other and puff their cheeks. You also know how proud second sister is. Only this kind of trivial family matter can make her angry. Whatever military affairs, national affairs, or worldly affairs, she calculates them as if they were playing chess. It was because she was indifferent that she was invincible. I remember that every time we had a snowball fight, I was with her. It was called grand. She tossed us around like we were marching into a war. We always returned victorious, but she never got tired of it. Once, I secretly stuffed a small snowball into the back of her collar. She chased me around half of the prince's mansion. Su Xiao didn't have the code of brotherhood and was just foolishly laughing. After second sister tidied me up, I chased after Su Xiao and killed half of the prince's mansion to vent my anger. Now that I think about it, how many fathers in the world are as sullen as Su Xiao? None, right? With such a disappointing son like me, it's already good enough that he didn't die from anger. After I turned 20, I didn't want to pursue any imperial ambitions. I only wanted to do two things well, to practice martial arts and to avenge my mother with my own hands. To command an army and give Su Xiao a lighter burden in his later years. Sweet Potato held Su Fengnian's slightly cold hand and didn't say anything to comfort him. Su Fengnian shook his head and laughed, it's good that he really ascended. I'm willing to believe in the one who rides the bull. Sweet Potato laughed softly, I heard that Hong Shixiang is the reincarnation of Ancestor Liu. Then young master, you're the most powerful person in the world. You've beaten up Ancestor Liu's immortals, and often at that. Su Fengnian smiled. Sweet Potato turned sideways, one hand supporting her cheek, and two fingers of her other hand stroking her young master's eyelashes. She said softly, young master, your eyelashes are really long. I used to dream of touching them. Su Fengnian didn't stop her little action. He said, Sweet Potato, when I leave Dunhuang, you also go back to Beiliang. Don't be a death warrior pawn. Be my concubine in the future. Su Xiao will also agree. He's good at one thing, and that's that he doesn't ask about anyone's background. Even Lu Qingyan, the woman from the Green Party, can do it. Can't you? Sweet Potato shook her head. This might be the first time in her life that she didn't agree. Su Fengnian turned around and frowned. Sweet Potato, who seemed weak but was unusually stubborn in her bones, blinked her eyes. How can a concubine like a marionette kill people? Su Fengnian said unhappily, you like killing people? She nodded without hesitation. Su Fengnian stared. Sweet Potato hid in his arms and whispered, young master, do you like to be a prince of Bailiang just for show? Su Fengnian sighed and said, putting yourself in my shoes, I understand the reason. But can't you let me be unreasonable? Sweet Potato curled up in his arms like a kitten. It's Sweet Potato who is unreasonable. I should listen to everything master says. Su Fengnian didn't say anything. Suddenly, his eyes lit up. He narrowed his eyes, which would make any woman envious. He patted Sweet Potato's round buttocks and ordered, sit on me. After Sweet Potato sat on him, she looked confused and shy. She whispered, young master, do you want to do it here? Su Fengnian said fiercely, what do you think? You know, Auntie said that I'm 70 to 80% similar to the Beimang Empress when she was young. She took off her skirt and whispered in his ear, young master, there's a dragon throne in the hall. Tomorrow, I'll wear the dragon robe and go there. Chapter 538. A fledgling young swordsman met a newly minted female swordsman. In the end, he suffered a crushing defeat and could only beg the female swordsman to spare his life. After sending Sweet Potato back to rest, Su Fengnian did not expect to be able to do that kind of thing on the dragon throne in the palace in the next few days. Women had just broken out of their melons, so to have sex every day would be too ungentlemanly. Su Fengnian returned to the roof of the palace alone and sat in a daze. During this time, he nurtured his sword and Xian Lei. After that, he dripped his blood on the spring plum blossoms. After dawn, the morning glow slowly bloomed on the eastern horizon. Su Fengnian looked at the magnificent scene above the 9 heavens. At this moment, the melodious morning bell of the giant fairy palace rang out. For some reason, perhaps because the battle on Changle Peak had vented all his anger, Su Fengnian felt a surge of noble spirit in his chest. The flow of his qi was much faster than usual, especially when he stood up and saw with his own eyes that the morning glow between heaven and earth moved from east to west. When the ray of morning glow fell before his eyes, Su Fengnian sat cross-legged. His flying sword was exposed from his sleeves, and the flying sword's sword aura exploded. This flying sword, which was only of average quality among the 12 flying swords, flew out of his hand and spun happily without control. It was like a monster in a fantasy. After hundreds of years of arduous cultivation, it was enlightened in a single day. The sword embryo was complete. There was a sword coming from the east. Su Fengnian was wild with joy. He had worn out his iron shoes in vain, only to find what he was looking for without any effort. Immediately he did not need any qi to guide him. With a thought, the flying sword, Morning Dew, flashed and disappeared. Wherever his heart pointed, the sword would follow. After teasing for a long time, Su Fengnian's mind was filled with an unworthy thought. Damn it, I can finally nurture one less sword. Su Fengnian was not in a hurry to put away his sword. He quietly sat where he was and watched the morning dew's flight path. His eyes gradually revealed an expression of shock. He tightly pursed his lips and gnashed his teeth. What a dong tai! The wonder of the flying sword does not lie in the flying sword itself. It does not even nurture the sword. It lies in the hidden sword technique. Su Fengnian self-deprecatingly said, if I had said it earlier, given my personality, I would have definitely racked my brain to find a shortcut. It's better not to say it. Su Fengnian raised his smiling face. His 5 fingers flipped and the flying sword circled around him. He looked like a delicate and naive girl who had just experienced her first awakening of love. The more Su Fengnian watched, the more he wanted to laugh. This was probably the joy of practicing martial arts. On the path of martial arts, the heavens would not let down those who worked hard. If there were some more opportunities, there would be all kinds of glimmers of hope. There would be a pleasant surprise of jumping out of the well. Su Fengnian put the morning dew back into his sword pouch and jumped off the roof. He walked through the purple gold palace and returned to Qingqiuzhai. Using the only memory he had before he started practicing blade martial arts, he clearly recognized the layout of the palace courtyard from above. He would not get lost. Perhaps because of Sweet Potato's words, some of the palace maids and eunuchs who had woken up early to work were very respectful. Although they did not kneel, they still stood with their heads lowered, not daring to take a second look. Seeing her leaning against the courtyard door waiting for his return, Su Fengnian was somewhat absent-minded. Sweet Potato said softly, "Young master, I have already prepared a bowl of plain porridge and a few side dishes according to your taste." Su Fengnian tapped her forehead. "Don't you know some ways to maintain your health? Don't you know how to slack off?" Sweet Potato smiled. "That is the life of the young ladies. I can't envy them, and I don't like it either. Being exposed to the wind will make you cold. Being exposed to the sun will make you heatstroke. Crying after reading a few lines of palace-made poetry is not the temperament of our Bailiang women." Su Fengnian finished his breakfast. In today's world, the rich usually ate 3 meals, while the poor ate 2. As for those who were qualified to raise palace maids and eunuchs, they were no longer wealthy in the ordinary sense. In this way, Sweet Potato, who could wear a dragon robe and play the role of an empress, was indeed much more wealthy than the young ladies. She single-handedly controlled the life and death of 70 to 80,000 people in Dunhuang City. In the end, when it came to Su Fengnian, she was still a maidservant. Su Fengnian really couldn't find anything to be discontent about. He came to the study room that was like being in the Bailiang Palace in Wutongan. The large red sandalwood table was filled with secret files that Sweet Potato had brought over and her aunt's handwritten handwriting. Su Fengnian saw a brass scroll painting. He glanced at Sweet Potato, who was standing beside him and grinding with her sleeves rolled up. He saw the corners of her mouth curl up. He opened it to take a look. As expected, it was a portrait that was obviously drawn by a court painter. She wore a bright phoenix crown and had the posture of a mother model. Su Fengnian went back and forth between the painting and Sweet Potato several times. He clicked his tongue and said, "It's really similar. The shape is 70.5, and the spirit is 60. Seeing Sweet Potato's burning gaze, Su Fengnian expressionlessly waved his hand and said, "Rest for 2 days." She tilted her head and smiled. Su Fengnian slapped her buttocks and said with a smile, "Virtue. Outside of Wutongan, you are unbearably wild. Wait until this young master restores his strength. Next time, I will definitely make you beg for mercy." Su Fengnian didn't touch the secret manuals that martial artists yearn for even in their dreams. His tide listening pavilion didn't have enough of them. Those martial artists whose innate talents weren't lacking were like housewives who couldn't cook without rice. They didn't have a great teacher to guide them, nor did they have a master to guide them through the door, nor did they have a secret manual to help them enter the room. It was indeed difficult for them to move forward. Their heroic spirit was lacking, and it was difficult for them to make a name for themselves. However, these 2 things weren't rare for the children of influential families. On one hand, they didn't have enough willpower, and they couldn't bear the suffering of sailing against the current. On the other hand, a large part of it was because there were too many paths leading to higher realms, to the point where they didn't know where to start. Or perhaps they went astray. If they learned all kinds of martial arts and read all the secret manuals, it would instead be difficult for them to become a grandmaster. As for Su Fengnian, who was close to Wang Xianji, he knew that he shouldn't bite off more than he could chew. As a result, he had always picked secret manuals that were beneficial to his blade technique. Now that he had Wang Xianji's blade technique manual, he was even more undistracted. Su Fengnian was working so hard because he truly felt that if he didn't put his life on the line to practice martial arts, he wouldn't be able to face the fellow who had been sloppy and thieving with him and was still carrying a wooden sword. The next time they met, once his identity was discovered, wouldn't he be chopped to death by Wenhua's wooden sword?